You're listening to Fanfiction Reader, where stories come alive through sound. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the tale.
Chapter 1. On that day, there was a lot of fog. The boundless thick fog rolls outside the window, thick as if the whole world has disappeared beyond the fog. Only the chaotic and unknown skylight penetrates the fog and shines into the room, making this quiet room maintain a kind of half-darkness. Bright light. In the slightly messy single apartment, Ju Ming leaned over the desk, and the sundries on the desk were roughly pushed aside, and he was writing like a haggard. On the seventh day, the situation didn't change at all. Thick fog covered everything outside the window, and the window was blocked by an unknown force. The whole room seemed to be cast into some kind of abnormal space by something. No way to communicate with the outside world, no water or electricity, but the lights are always on and the computer can be turned on even though I have unplugged it. As if there was a slight sound of wind coming from the direction of the window, Ju Ming, who was writing in his diary, suddenly raised his head. His haggard eyes lighted up slightly, but the next second he realized that it was only his own hallucinations. There is still only a lingering pale thick fog outside that window, and a dead and silent world indifferently envelopes his small dwelling place. His gaze swept over the window sill, and he saw the wrench and hammer that had been discarded indiscriminately. There were traces of him trying to leave the room in the past few days, but now these hard and crude tools just lay there quietly, as if in mocking his embarrassment. After a few seconds, Ju Ming's expression became calm again. With this abnormal calm, he lowered his head again and returned to his writing. I'm stuck, completely clueless. In the past few days, I even tried to tear down the roof, walls and floors, but with all my strength, I couldn't leave a trace on the wall. The room becomes like a box cast with space, with no way out, except for that door. But what's going on outside that door is even worse. Ju Ming stopped again. He slowly examined the handwriting he had just left, and flipped through the diary casually, looking at what he had left in the past few days. Repressed words, meaningless thoughts, fidgety doodles, and cold jokes written when forced to relax. He didn't know what was the point of writing these things down, and who would read these nonsense things in the future. In fact, he was not even a person who was used to keeping a diary. As a middle school teacher with limited leisure time, but not much energy is spent on it. But now, like it or not, he has plenty of free time. After waking up, he was trapped in his room. Outside the window is a dense fog that will not dissipate. The fog is so thick that you can't even see anything other than the fog. The whole world seems to have lost the cycle of day and night. The 24-hour constant, dizzy light fills the room, and the windows are locked. He died. The water and electricity were cut off, the mobile phone had no signal, and no matter how loud the noise was in the room, it would not be able to attract rescue from the outside world. It's like an absurd nightmare. Everything in the dream is running against the laws of nature. But Ju Ming has exhausted all methods to confirm one thing. There are no hallucinations or dreams here, only a world that is no longer normal, and a temporarily normal self. He took a deep breath, and his eyes finally fell on the only door at the end of the room. An ordinary cheap white wooden door with a calendar that I forgot to replace last year and has kept it nailed to it. The door handle has been polished, and the door mat is placed a little crookedly. That door can be opened. If this closed and alienated room is like a cage, then the most vicious thing about this cage is that it actually retains a door that can be opened at any time, luring the prisoners in the cage to push the door and leave at all times. But the opposite of the gate is not the outside that Ju Ming wants. There are no old but friendly corridors, sunny streets and vibrant crowds and everything you are familiar with. There is only a strange and disturbing foreign land, and over there is also an inescapable dilemma. But Ju Ming knew that there was not much time left for him to hesitate, and the so-called choice never existed from the very beginning. His food reserves are limited, and there are only a quarter of the barrels of mineral water left. He has tried all means of getting out of trouble and calling for help in this closed room, and now there is only one way in front of him. That is to be prepared and go to the opposite side of the door to seek a chance. Perhaps there will be a chance to investigate exactly what caused this strange and embarrassing supernatural situation. Ju Ming took a deep breath, lowered his head, and wrote the last few paragraphs in his diary. But no matter what, the only choice now is to go to the opposite side of the door, at least on that weird ship, find something to eat, and my exploration and preparation over the past few days should be enough to survive on that ship. Although the preparation I can do there is actually limited. Finally, to the latecomers, if I fail to come back, and one day in the future, some rescuer or the like opens this room and sees this diary, please don't write down what I wrote. All of this is regarded as an absurd story. It really happened. Although it is creepy, but there is really a person named Ju Ming who is trapped in a crazy and strange spacetime vision. I tried my best to describe all the abnormal phenomena I saw in this diary, and also recorded all the efforts I made to get out of trouble. If there are any latecomers, please at least remember my name, at least remember that this happened. Ju-ming closed the diary, threw the pen into the pen holder next to it, and slowly stood up from behind the desk. It's time to leave, before falling into passivity and despair. But after thinking for a while, he didn't go directly to the only door that could lead to the outside world, but went straight to his bed. He must face the four and land across the door with a complete attitude, but his current state, especially his mental state, is not good enough. Ju-ming didn't know if he could fall asleep, but even forcing himself to lie on the bed and empty his mind was better than going to the opposite side in a state of exhaustion. 8 hours later, Ju-ming opened his eyes. There is still a chaotic mist outside the window, and the day and night are unclear with oppressive gloom. Ju-ming directly ignored the situation outside the window. He took out food from the few remaining reserves and ate until he was 80% full. Then he came to the full-length mirror in the corner of the room. The man in the mirror still has disheveled hair, looks quite embarrassed, and has no temperament at all. But Ju-ming still stares at himself in the mirror, as if to imprint this appearance in his mind forever. He stared at the mirror like this for a few minutes, then whispered to himself, as if to say to the person in the mirror, "Your name is Ju-ming, at least on this side, your name is Ju-ming, keep this in mind at all times." After that, he turned and left. Coming to the familiar door, Ju-ming took a deep breath and put his hand on the handle. Except for a suit of clothes, he didn't bring any extra things, neither food nor self-defense equipment. This is the experience left over from the previous explorations. He couldn't bring anything except himself. Go through this door. In fact, he even felt that even this self had to be questioned, because Ju-ming turned the handle and pushed open the door. A mass of shrinking and wriggling gray-black mist appeared in front of his eyes like some kind of curtain. In the ever-expanding mist, he seemed to have heard the sound of waves coming into the room. Stepping across the layer of fog, the slightly salty sea breeze came oncoming, the illusory sound of waves in his ears became real, and there was a slight shaking feeling under his feet. Ju-ming opened his eyes after a short period of dizziness, and saw there is a wide and empty wooden deck, a tall mast standing under the dark clouds, and the slightly undulating sea surface beyond the ship's side where the edge can't be seen at all. Ju-ming lowered his head, and what he saw was a stronger body than he remembered, a captain's uniform that looked exquisitely crafted and expensive but had a completely unfamiliar style, a pair of thick knuckle palms, and a black flintlock pistol with a classic and exquisite appearance. Yes, even self has a question mark. Mum, I'm back. Chapter 2 The Captain of the Lost Home. This is not the first time Ju-ming came to the opposite side through this door. A few days ago, Ju-ming woke up and found that he was trapped in his room by some kind of vision, and after the strange thick fog covered the whole world, he discovered this strange place opposite the gate. After all, that door is now the only exit from his room. He still remembers the bewilderment he felt when he opened the door for the first time but saw the deck outside, and even more remembered the shock and panic when he lowered his head for the first time and saw that he had changed his body. But after that, in order to seek the opportunity to break through the predicament, he has boldly carried out several successful explorations on this side, although he still has not figured out what happened to him, and he has not figured out that this ship appeared outside his door. What is the situation of the strange big ship? But at least, he has gained some experience and has some preliminary understanding of this ship. Like the previous few times, Ju-ming used the shortest possible time to force himself to get rid of the dizziness caused by passing through the gate, and then immediately confirmed the condition of this body. He checked the short gun in his hand, and by the memory compares all the details, and finally confirms that the items he is carrying are the same as when he left the deck last time. It seems that every time you pass through this door, your body will seamlessly switch. It would be great if you can put a camera on the deck, so you can confirm that you pushed the captain's cabin door and returns to the apartment room. Will this body change when the time comes? It's a pity that the items of the two worlds cannot pass through the gate, and there is no way to bring the camera over. However, the mobile phone in the apartment recorded the scene of passing through the gate from that side. I did walk through the black mist myself. So it is true that the body changes when passing through the black mist. Is it like this? Ju-ming muttered. He knew that the way he stood on the deck talking to himself might look a little funny to outsiders, but he had to make some noise on this empty and deserted weird ghost ship. He need a little proof to prove that he is still alive. A gust of salty sea breeze blew across the deck, shaking the black and blue captain's suit of unknown material. Ju-ming sighed softly, but he didn't walk towards the deck but turned around to look at it. Looking at the door behind him, he put his hand on the doorknob, turned the handle, and then just pushed the door open. He will see a gray-black thick fog. Through the thick fog, he will return to the bachelor apartment that he has lived in for many years. With force in his hands, he pulled the door open. The slightly heavy oak door made a creaking sound. Inside the door was a slightly dim cabin. In the dim light, one could see exquisite tapestries hanging on the walls, shelves with many decorations, and there is a large nautical table in the center of the room, and there is a small door in the deepest part of the room, with a wine-red carpet in front of it. Push the door open, and you will return to your bachelor apartment, and open the door. You will be the captain's cabin, and the latter is obviously the normal facility on this ship. Ju-Ming stepped into the captain's cabin, and when he passed the door, he habitually looks to the left. A mirror as tall as a person was fixed on the wall next to it, and Ju-Ming was clearly reflected in the mirror. The way it is now. It was a tall man with thick black hair, a majestic short beard, and deep-set eye sockets. Just by his appearance alone, he seemed to have an aura of calmness. He seemed to be over 40 years old, but his heroic appearance, the appearance and the oppressive eye seemed to blur this sense of age, and the well-made captain's uniform shows the special identity of the person in the mirror. Ju-Ming stretched his neck and made a face in the mirror. He felt that he was an easygoing and friendly person, and the image in the mirror did not match his temperament, but he soon gave up this attempt, because he felt that instead of being friendly in the mirror, he changed from a majestic captain to a psychopathic serial killer. While Ju-Ming was doing these actions, a slight clicking sound came from the direction of the navigation table. He looked in the direction of the sound without any surprise, and saw a wooden statue of a goat's head is turning its face towards itself. Little by little the inanimate block of wood seems to come to life at this moment, and the pair of obsidian eyes embedded in the wooden face are watching here faintly. The panicked memories of seeing this weird scene for the first time flashed through his mind, but Ju-Ming just cocked his mouth, and he walked towards the nautical table, and the wooden goat's head on the table was also turning little by little. Neck, a hoarse and gloomy voice came from its wooden cavity. Name? Duncan, Ju-Ming said calmly, Duncan Abu Normer. The voice of the wooden goat's head changed from hoarse and gloomy to warm and friendly in an instant. Good morning, Captain. I am glad to see that you still remember your name. How is your mood today? How is your body today? You slept well last night, well? I hope you had a good dream. Besides, today is a good day to set sail. The sea is calm, the wind is good, cool and comfortable, and there is no annoying navy and noisy crew. Sir, you know a noisy crew. You're noisy enough. Although it's not the first time Ju-Ming has dealt with this weird goat's head, Ju-Ming still feels a tremor in his brain at this moment. Come out, quiet. Oh, of course, Captain, you like quiet, and your loyal first mate, bosun, sailor, and lookout knows it all too well. There are many advantages to being quiet, and there was once a medical could also be in the field of philosophy or architecture. Ju-Ming now felt that not only his brain was shaking, but even his bronchi began to tremble. I order you to keep quiet. When the word order came out, the goat's head finally fell silent. Ju-Ming breathed a sigh of relief and walked to the nautical table to sit down. Now, he is the captain of this empty ghost ship. Duncan Abu Normer, a strange name, a surname that is difficult to pronounce. He knew this in his mind the moment he walked through the black gray fog for the first time and stepped on the ship. He knew that his body over here was named Duncan, and he knew that he was the ship. The owner of the ship knows that the ship is on a long journey far beyond imagination. He knows this, but only this. The memory remaining in his mind was vague and thin, so that only the above-mentioned key passages were left, and other details were completely blank, as if he knew that the ship had an amazing sailing plan, but he had no idea where it was going. Well, the original owner of the ship, the real Duncan Abu Normer, seems to have died a long time ago. And those things left in Ju-Ming's mind are more like the strongest and deepest impressions left in the world by a ghost captain after his complete death. Instinct told Ju-Ming that there was a big problem behind the identity of this Captain Duncan, especially in the case of supernatural phenomena. Talking wooden goat heads on this ship, the mystery of this Captain Duncan might even mean that something it was a danger that he had never imagined, but he had to wear this name to be able to move safely on this ship. Because like the wooden goat's head just now, something on this ship is trying to confirm the captain's identity at any moment. Even the ship itself is constantly identifying the captain. It felt as if it were some kind of insurance policy, as if the captain of the ship could really forget his name at any moment, and if he did forget his name, something extremely terrible and dangerous would happen. That's why it is necessary to set up checking means everywhere on the ship. Ju-Ming didn't know what the consequences would be if Captain Duncan forgot his name, but he believed that once he said his name wrongly, there would be no good consequences. After all, even that wooden goat's head on the nautical table doesn't look like a good person. But if the name is Duncan Abu Normer, then everything on this ship is quite amiable. Anyway, they don't look very intelligent. Ju-Ming, maybe it should be called Duncan. Duncan finished his brief contemplation and memories and then looked at the open chart on the table. However, there are no identifiable routes, marks or land on the sea chart, not even a single island can be seen. On the surface of its rough and thick parchment, only large areas of gray-white clumps can be seen that are constantly rolling and undulating. Those off-white, mist-like things seem to cover the original route on the paper, and the only thing that can be seen in the center of the chart is a looming silhouette of a ship in the dense fog. Duncan Juming has no experience in sailing in the past few decades, but even those who don't know the charts must know that the normal charts are not like this. Obviously, like the wooden goat's head on the table, this chart is also some kind of supernatural item. It's just that Duncan hasn't summed up its usage rules yet. It seemed that he had noticed that the captain's attention was finally on the chart. The goat's head, which had been quiet for a long time on the table, finally moved again. It began to make a rattling sound of wood rubbing, and its neck twisted slightly. The twisting was relatively restrained at the beginning, but soon the rattling sound reached a level that could not be ignored in the end. The whole head of this guy started to move ghostly on the base, as if the vibration mode was turned on. Duncan was afraid that if the product continued to smoke, he would dig wood for fire on his nautical table, so he finally couldn't help but glanced at it, say, "Yes, Captain, I want to emphasize again, today is really a good day to set sail, and the Lost Country is waiting for your orders as always. Are we going to hoist the sails?" Chapter 3 Frontier Trek. The hard black face of the wooden goat's head stared at Duncan sitting behind the nautical table, and there seemed to be a strange light flowing in the obsidian eyes. In fact, this thing has no ability to produce expressions at all. But Duncan clearly understood from the other side. There was a look of anticipation on that wooden face. In fact, this is not the first time Goathead has urged him to set sail. Every time he comes here, Goathead will urge him like this once. He even felt that the ship was constantly urging him to end this blind drifting at sea as soon as possible, and set sail to return to the right track as soon as possible. However, Duncan fell silent. His face of innate majesty was covered with clouds. In his meditation and silence, he was clearly aware of two problems. First, he was alone on the entire ship, and the size of the ship was insanely large as a sail-powered ship. The entire length of the ship called Lost Country, it is roughly estimated that it is at least 150 to 200 meters away from Duncan, and to control such a huge monster, at least dozens or even hundreds of experienced sailors are required. How can he drive it alone? Second, after removing the above-mentioned professional factors, there is still a key problem that hinders his sailing trip. He cannot sail a boat. Duncan was a little anxious. He tried to imagine what would happen if he asked the weird and noisy Goathead in front of him for advice on ship driving skills, and he became even more anxious after assuming. However, the goat's head didn't know what the captain was thinking. It just asked, "Captain, do you have any concerns? If you are worried about the situation of the lost home, you can rest assured that the lost home will always be ready. Are you ready to sail with you to the end of the world, or are you worried that today's voyage will be unlucky? I have a little knowledge of divination, but which kind of divination do you believe in more? Astronomy, incense, and crystals are all fine. When it comes to crystals, do you remember?" Duncan tried his best to tense the muscles on his face, and while restraining the urge to fight to the death with the goat's head in front of him, he said in a deep voice, "I'll go to the deck to observe the situation first. You stay here quietly. Follow your wishes, but I must remind you that the Lost Country has been drifting blindly for too long, and you must take charge of it as soon as possible to get this voyage back on track," the goat's head said, and with the sound of wood rubbing, it finally returned to the original posture. Duncan suddenly felt that the whole world stopped. He breathed a sigh of relief. The resonance in his brain gradually calmed down. Then he picked up the flintlock on the table, got up, and walked out of the captain's cabin. He found this old-looking flintlock gun while exploring the ship, along with a one-handed sword, which is currently hanging around his waist, and these two things he found on the ship guaranteed security in action. In the past few days of exploration, he spent a long time roughly learning how to use these two things, although so far, he has never seen any living creatures other than himself on this ship. Talking items don't count. The salty sea breeze blew in, and Duncan's slightly irritable mood calmed down. He came to the captain's outdoor deck and subconsciously looked up at the sky. Thick dark clouds still covered the sky as far as the eye could see. The sun, moon, and stars could not be seen in the clouds, only the turbid sky shrouded the boundless sea. This scene has been going on for a long time. In fact, since the day Duncan came to this ship, he has only seen such a sky. It even made him wonder if there is no normal weather in this world at all. Is the dense scene the eternal celestial phenomenon in this sea area? Duncan turned around, and he saw the door of the captain's cabin standing there quietly. A line of words was carved on the crossbeam above the door in some kind of alphabet he didn't know, and when his eyes focused on the line of words, its meaning came directly to his mind clearly. The gate of the homeless. The gate of the lost. Is it the lost? Duncan muttered to himself, and then laughed at himself. This ship has a good name. Then he walked around the captain's cabin and walked along the stairs on the edge of the deck to the upper deck at the stern, where there was a wooden platform, which was the place with the widest view of the whole ship except for the observation deck. A heavy black steering wheel quietly awaits the arrival of the helmsman on the platform. Duncan frowned. For some reason, he suddenly felt a sense of urgency and anxiety, and this feeling seemed to come out of nowhere the moment he saw the steering wheel. He didn't feel this way when he came here a few times before. As if in response to the anxiety in his heart, an unexplained and chaotic wind suddenly blew across the deck, and the surrounding originally calm sea also had waves in an instant, although the wind and waves were not enough to affect the large-scale lost homelander. What effect did it have? But Duncan's heart was full of alarms, and the next second, he was driven by intuition to look in the direction of the bow of the ship. On the sea directly in front of the lost home, between the chaotic sky and the sea, a boundless high wall of white mist that seemed to reach the sky seemed to appear out of thin air, making his eyes widen instantly. It was a white mist that seemed to surround and isolate the whole world, connecting the sky and the earth like a cliff, and what made Duncan Juming more vigilant than its palpitating scale was that he instantly thought of the boundless mist outside the window of his bachelor apartment. The Landless is heading straight for that wall of fog. Duncan didn't know what the thick fog was, nor what was in the depths of the fog, but he instinctively felt the great danger, and his survival instincts told him that being swallowed by that thick fog was never a good thing. He subconsciously rushed to the platform where the rudder was located, a huge sense of powerlessness shrouded at the same time. Even if he was at the helm, how could he drive this huge ship away from the wall of fog by himself? But he still came to the steering wheel instinctively, and almost at the same time, he heard a hoarse and gloomy voice coming from a copper pipe next to the steering wheel connected to the captain's cabin. It was the voice of Goat's Head. The tone of the weird thing was a little panicked this time. "Your Excellency, the border is collapsing ahead, and we are approaching the limit of reality. Please adjust your course immediately." Hearing the panicked voice of the Goat's Head, Duncan almost cursed. Adjusting the course is easy to say, but you conjured up 100 or 80 good brothers who can sail the boat on the spot to drive this thing. Immediately afterwards, he raised his head and glanced at the direction of the forward masts, and saw a few bare masts standing on the deck, and the sadness in his heart was even stronger, not to mention sailing. In fact, this ship had no sails at all, so several poles are empty. Agitated, he didn't even bother to seriously think about the weird words that came out of Goat's Head just now. Only his instinct made him subconsciously grasp the steering wheel that seemed to be trembling slightly for some reason. In the past few days, this is the first time he has put his hands on the steering wheel of the lost homeland. The strange situation on this ship and the repeated urging of the Goat's Head have always made him suspicious, and he is full of steering resisted, and now, he finally had no chance to hesitate. He held the rudder tightly, and in his blank mind, he didn't even have time to conceive how to steer an empty ghost ship by himself. The change will happen in the next instant. The sound like a mountain roar, and a tsunami exploded in Duncan's mind, as if 10,000 cheering people were standing on the shore to see off a ship, as if there were thousands of sailors shouting the captain's words on the deck. The name seems to be mixed with desolate boat songs and invisible turbulent waves. A group of green flames appeared at the edge of his field of vision, and Duncan subconsciously looked at his palm. He saw a group of emerald green flames suddenly burst out from the steering wheel of the lost homeland, and then swept over with astonishing speed, spread all over the body. In the raging flames, the flesh and blood body suddenly became empty and unreal, and the captain's uniform became worn and tattered as if soaked in sea water for dozens or hundreds of years. Under the flesh and blood that suddenly became like a spirit body, Duncan could even vaguely see his own skeleton. Flames were jumping on the crystal-clear jade skeleton, and the unquenchable fire was flowing through his body like water. However, he couldn't feel the slightest pain and burning. In the raging flames, he only felt that his perception was spreading in all directions. The fire swept down from the bridge, spread over the deck, over the side of the ship, over the mast. The flames intertwined like a net, and then rose from the deck like breathing, spreading along the lonely mast, and finally in the sea intertwined with the mist to form a huge sail like yarn and mist. The lost homes set sail before this rapidly collapsing frontier of reality. Holy shit, surprise. P.S. There is a new full-book episode on the Sword of Dawn. Theoretically, it should be the last episode. You can go and read it. Chapter 4 Spirit World Rally. The dark green flames burned blazingly on his body, and the flesh and bones turned into a translucent spirit in the flames. Duncan was in charge of the rudder of the lost homeland in the flames, and his perception seemed to spread along the flames. Eventually it spread to the entire ship. It turned out that it didn't need a crew at all. The lost country can set sail by itself. As long as the captain is at the helm, it can set sail at any time. When the dark green flame rose into the sky, Duncan fell into a brief panic. But in the past few days of exploration, he had seen more than one supernatural phenomenon on this ship, and these experiences forced him to calm down. And at the last, during the critical few seconds, he did not let go of the steering wheel in his hand. Now he finally determined that the flame should be some kind of power that is harmless to him. Regardless of whether his body can recover in the future, at least now, the power of this flame is helping him control the ship under his feet. Ghost ship. The cheering tsunami sound in his mind gradually faded away, and Duncan felt that his mind was clearer than ever, and all kinds of indescribable touches came from the lost lands like his extended limbs, although he still couldn't understand it. He has the knowledge and experience that a qualified captain should have, but at least now he has the ability to control the ship by himself. The sails of the spirit body, like yarn and mist, bulged on the mast, and many auxiliary jig sails and side sails began to adjust their angles by themselves. The wind picked up a consistent momentum, and the huge lost country ended its previous aimless drift and began to stabilize under the impetus of the sail. Duncan tried to turn the steering wheel in his hand, and the real power feedback came to his mind. He could feel that the huge hull under his feet finally began to turn gradually, and began to try to stay away from the boundless mist ahead. But the turning speed still seems not enough. The boundless thick fog is still approaching a little bit, and the sharp cry of the goat's head came from the copper pipe next to the steering wheel. Attention, we are approaching the limit of reality. We are going to fallen into the spirit world. Captain, we need to. I'm doing it. Duncan yelled and interrupted Goat's Head's voice. Instead of making noise down here, you might as well think of what you can do to help. The Goat's Head fell silent instantly, but just when Duncan thought the other party had finally calmed down, its hoarse, shrill and even creepy shout came from the brass pipe again. Come on. Come on. Come on. Duncan, at this moment, he suddenly felt that everything around him lost his sense of reality. He accepted the vision he encountered, accepted the supernatural power on this ship, and even accepted that he was being simmered by a green fire, but no matter what, no one could have imagined that the Goat Head, who had given him a great sense of danger from the very beginning, would be so surprised at this moment. This evil thing was very evil from the beginning, but at this moment it is too evil. But the ever-approaching dense fog did not give Duncan more opportunities to think and complain. Even though the lost country had begun to turn rapidly, judging from its huge hull, the turning speed could almost be described as drifting. However, the thick fog in the distance seems to be consciously chasing the prey in front of it. A large piece of thin mist diffuses from the edge of it. The mist spreads extremely fast, covering the entire space around the lost homeland almost instantly. The moment the mist rose from the sea, Duncan clearly felt a strange change in the surrounding environment. The sky suddenly became extremely dim, and the originally blue sea water unexpectedly appeared at an unknown time. Straight black thin lines. Those black thin lines floated up from under the sea surface like finely entangled hairs, and dyed the entire ocean in pitch black at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the mist, there seemed to be countless shadowy things emerging. We have fallen into the spirit world. The noisy and strange come-on sound of the Goat's Head finally stopped, and its shouting sounded as if it came from a very far away place, mixed with countless deep and subtle voices, whispering, as if there were a lot of malicious voices surrounding Duncan. But the lost country has not completely fallen, Captain. Hold the helm. Before sinking into the deep sea, the lost country has power to maintain its course. We can still go out. The premise is that I need to know where to drive. Duncan roared in a low voice, his voice mixed with the crackling of green flames, as if it came from hell. I have lost my sense of direction. Intuition, Captain, intuition, cried the goat-headed voice through the brass pipes. Your intuition is better than the markings on the chart. Duncan, a sense of powerlessness welled up in his heart, but Duncan didn't have the extra strength to bicker with an evil goat's head. Since the other party said to rely on intuition, he should simply be more reckless. Following the feeling that remained before the mist rose, he firmly grasped the steering wheel in his hand, and tried his best to turn it in the direction he believed. The lost home made a series of creepy howls from top to bottom. The huge hull drew an astonishing arc on the sea that had completely turned into darkness. The wind howled and the fog swirled. In the bright sky and mist, Duncan suddenly caught something in the mist that seemed to be gradually emerging from the corner of his eye. In the next second, he realized that it was a ship, a white ship that looked a little smaller than the lost country, with a black chimney standing in the middle of the hull. At the end of the beautiful arc the lost land had made, the ship that had suddenly emerged from the fog was coming straight on, or rather, the lost land was coming straight on. There was only a cry left in Duncan's heart. Damn chicken, something happened to the boat in the spirit world. He has been exploring this weird world for so long and hasn't seen other living people. Why does a ship suddenly appear at such a time? What kind of probability is this two-way rush? The wind is howling, the waves are raging, and the boundless sea is releasing its terrifying power to the fullest. In the face of this mighty natural force that can tear apart the super strong, the white oak is squeezing out the last bit of power in the steam turbine. Against the fate of death, the gray-haired Captain Lawrence Creed stood in the pilot house. The solid walls and glass windows of the pilot house did not give him any sense of security. The spasm seemed to flow directly into his mind through the series of gears and linkages behind the wheel. Through the wide window, he could clearly see the astonishing huge waves being set off outside the ship's side. But what was more frightening than the astonishing huge waves was the strange thick fog rising and spreading from the distant sea, as well as the looming shadows in the thick fog. Black lightning. The White Oak is the most advanced steamship in the world, but no matter how advanced the machine is, it can only ensure that the ship is surging in the normal sea area. But what it and its captain have to face now is the collapsed frontier of reality, is the biting cold that is spreading from the stench of the evil god's palaces at the bottom of the world. Captain. The priest can't hold it anymore. The chief mate's mournful shout came from the side, and Lawrence heard some muddy and hoarse echoes from the other party's voice. He looked ahead of the bridge and saw an ominous purple smoke rising from the incense burner placed on the prayer table. Black flames, and the venerable and loyal clergyman in a dark blue robe is sitting tremblingly in front of the incense burner. His mouth and nose are full of blood, and the colors of madness and sobriety in his eyes are constantly appearing. Lawrence's heart sank. He knew that the venerable pastor was still on the side of mankind. He was using his last pious beliefs and the most pure and holy soul to fight against the cry from the depths of the world, but this insistence was at the end of his strength. The purple-black smoke coming out of the incense burner is the proof that the pollution has broken through the prayer. Once the priest falls, every sane mind on this ship may become a door leading to the deep sea, or even to the warp. Captain. The voice of the first mate came from the side again, and Lawrence interrupted him. The middle-aged captain's face was full of determination at this moment. Temporarily close the holy emblem beacon, and we will sink into the spirit world. The first officer was stunned for a moment. The man who spent half his life at sea couldn't believe his ears. Captain? Sink into the spirit world in this way, at least for 10 minutes, we can avoid the most violent wave of the border collapse, and the priest will also have a chance to recover. Lawrence ordered again in an unquestionable tone, but this time there are 2 sentences of explanation. Follow my orders. The first officer opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something more, but then he gritted his teeth. You are the captain. The crew began to quickly execute the orders from the captain, and Lawrence, who was at the helm himself, took a deep breath. The holy emblem beacon in the depths of the cabin was gradually extinguishing, and he could feel the invisible protection surrounding the White Oak. The field is rapidly weakening, and without the protection of the sacred object, the ship is sinking into the spirit world interlayer between reality and the deep sea. A mist appeared on the surrounding sea surface, and the sea water was gradually turning black. This is very dangerous, but in history, there are no ships that return to the human world from the state of the spirit world. As a member of the Explorers Association, he has also read countless classics in this regard, as well as various books written by survivors. Various survival guides. How bad could it be? He only needs to let the White Oak hide from a wave of storms on the edge of the spirit world, and then carry out a thrilling spiritual drift with the surging power output by the advanced steam turbine. If luck still favors him, he can lead his crew, return to the world, then quickly hand over the damn abnormality 099 in the warehouse to the consul of the city-state of Pratt, and from then on, he will never go into the muddy waters of the authorities again in his life. It couldn't be worse. Lawrence soothed himself. Then he saw a 3-masted sailing ship, a full circle larger than the White Oak, suddenly appearing on the sea that suddenly became dark in the distance, drawing a thrilling arc with some kind of indomitable momentum, bumped into her head and face. Captain Lawrence stared blankly ahead. Grass. Mum. Another surprise. Thank you for your enthusiasm and support, and thanks to the silver leaf from the virtue has been eaten. Damink, another chapter today equals, but this update rhythm is limited to today. After all, the body is no better than the year 233. Chapter 5 interlaced. The huge shadow rolled over, and everyone on the White Oak saw this moment that would be remembered for the rest of their lives. It was a 3-masted warship that looked ancient and majestic. In this age when steamships were no longer rare, the sailing warship that emerged from the thick fog seemed to have walked out of an oil painting from a century ago. Its masts were tall, its sides were steep, and green flames like ghosts were burning on the black wooden hull. The huge sails fluttered in the void, and the sails were condensed with roaring illusions and layers of flames. Such scenes, even on the terrifying vast ocean, can only appear in the most terrifying shipwreck legends. It's about to hit, some crew members cried out in surprise. These people who made a living on the sea and were known for their bravery and rudeness could not help but lose their composure when facing such a huge ship. They shouted and ran, some tried to find shelter on the deck, some grabbed anything around them to stabilize themselves, and some even knelt down directly in the bumps and waves, praying and chanting the name of the storm goddess Gemona or the Lord of Death Bartok with unprecedented piety. In this vast ocean, the blessings of the gods have faded, but only the power of these two righteous gods can still look upon all their subjects equally. But not all crew members lost their composure. The first mate on the ship immediately turned his attention to the captain whom he trusted the most. He knew that sailing on the vast ocean was full of dangers, and an experienced captain was always the key to the fate of the entire ship. Lawrence had been on the sea for more than 30 years. The 50-year-old captain might not be as strong as when he was young, but his experience of surviving in this vast ocean might still give everyone a glimmer of hope. The ship that emerged from the thick fog was obviously not a normal ship sailing in the real world, but more like something that came out from the spiritual world or deeper. If it was some kind of extraordinary vision, then perhaps some kind of extraordinary power could be used to fight it. The old captains who sailed on the vast ocean had more or less some experience when facing extraordinary visions. However, the first mate only saw fear and shock on the captain's face. The old captain held the steering wheel motionlessly, as if he had not noticed that the entire ship was completely shrouded in shadow. He stared at the ship's shadow that was rolling in front of him, and the muscles on his face were as tight as a stone sculpture. He finally squeezed out a few words from between his teeth, but those words were colder than the wind on the cold sea. "It's the lost hometown captain." Captain? The first mate was startled by the name that floated into his ears. Like everyone who makes a living on the vast ocean, he had heard this title from many older, more experienced and more superstitious crew members than himself. "What did you say?" "Then lost hometown." Captain Lawrence seemed not to hear the first mate's voice. He just held the steering wheel of the White Oak with all his strength and roared as if he was roaring at something. Almost at the same time when he finished speaking, the towering hull of the lost homeland finally touched the bow of the White Oak. Almost all the sailors screamed. However, the expected earth-shaking collision did not occur. The huge ship burning with green flames seemed like a grand phantom, sweeping across the deck of the White Oak with a whistling illusion of light and flame. The thick hull, the gloomy cabin, the dimly lit corridor, the flaming keel and pillars. The sailors widened their eyes in horror, watching themselves crash into the illusion of the ghost ship, and the green flames burning on the ghost ship were like a net of fire, sweeping past them. Lawrence also watched the flames whistling towards him, but before that, he first saw the flames sweeping across the first mate in front of him. The first mate's body suddenly turned into an illusory spirit in the illusory flames, and the bones in the spirit burned like firewood. He then saw the priest next to the prayer platform in front of him, and saw that the flames on the priest's body flickered, as if the god behind him was still using a meager blessing to protect him from being swallowed by the lost hometown. Then the flames also burned Lawrence, and he saw that his body had undergone the same changes, and a strong sense of fatigue, obedience, and fear filled his whole body. The ocean amulet he hid on his body began to take effect, and a feeling of alternating heat and coolness barely maintained his sanity. With his remaining sanity, he passed through the cabins and corridors of the lost homeland. The eerie and depressing cabin came towards him, then whizzed away. Old wooden pillars burning with green fire were entangled with rotten ropes and barnacles. He saw a huge cargo hold, in which lay quietly all kinds of strange things that should have been buried in the deep sea. He then saw a luxurious cabin, in the middle of which was placed a wooden goat head on the table. The goat's head turned and looked coldly into Lawrence's eyes. Finally, Lawrence raised his head with all his strength, and he saw the figure at the steering wheel next to the classical rudder. The tall figure, in a black sailor's uniform, seemed as majestic and terrifying as the master of a nightmare. That figure dominated all the ghost flames, and even the sea that was already in the depths of the spiritual world seemed to be intimidated by his majesty, and a crack appeared behind him. Lawrence closed his eyes resignedly. He knew that he was now part of the lost homeland, and that the nightmarish captain needed some sacrifices to satisfy his endless emptiness and loneliness. But the next second, he mustered up the courage to open his eyes. He felt that all the courage and madness in his life seemed to be gathered in these few seconds. He recalled the knowledge he had gained from books and legends, and looked at the terrifying captain standing on the lost homeland as honestly and calmly as possible. "You don't have to take everyone, take me and leave my crew alone." However, the tall figure did not answer. He just cast a cold gaze over. There seemed to be a little curiosity in his eyes, as if he was curious why a tiny moral captain dared to bargain with him. Lawrence finally couldn't hold back and roared, "They all have wives and children." The figure standing on the lost homeland finally responded. He stared in Lawrence's direction and seemed to say something, but a loud whistling sounded from the side. In the whistling, Lawrence only vaguely heard some movements but could not hear a single word clearly. The response from the lost homeland just disappeared in the roar of the waves. "What did you say?" "The wind is too strong and I can't hear you." The next second, a huge noise rushed into Lawrence's ears, mixed with the sound of wind, waves and the shouts of sailors outside the door. He saw from the corner of his eye that the green flames were fading away quickly and the last remaining phantom of the lost hometown disappeared from the air like mist. Lawrence took a deep breath, and then he noticed that his hands, which had been burned by the green flames, had returned to their original state. Even the other people in the cab had turned into flesh and blood again. The devout priest was lying beside the prayer table, gasping for breath and chanting the holy name of the storm goddess Gemona. The ominous purple-black smoke in the incense burner gradually dissipated, and pure white smoke rose from the copper hood. It took Lawrence a long time to catch his breath, and then he looked around in doubt, as if he couldn't believe that the nightmare had just ended, until the first mate's voice came from the side. "Captain, that ship the lost homeland has left." Lawrence was a little dazed, and it took him a few seconds to react before he muttered to himself, "He actually let us go." The first mate didn't hear clearly for a moment. "Captain? What did you say?" "That Captain Duncan," Lawrence muttered subconsciously, but then he slapped himself as if he had accidentally mentioned some taboo words. Then he suddenly raised his head and looked at the first mate. "Call the roll call on the whole ship, quickly. See who is missing from the ship." The first mate nodded immediately, but just as he was about to leave, Lawrence stopped him and said, "Let's see if there are any more people on the ship." The first mate was stunned for a moment, then he reacted, with a hint of surprise and fear in his eyes. He took a deep breath, whispered the name of the storm goddess, and then quickly ran to the deck outside. On the White Oak, which was still sailing in the spiritual world, the sound of the assembly bell rang like a death sentence. Theoretically there will be one at noon ~. Chapter 6 The missing cargo. The mustering bell rang, followed by the hurried footsteps of the sailors. Lawrence stayed in the cab with the second mate and the pastor who hadn't recovered his breath. The old captain looked at the sea outside the window. At this moment, the White Oak was still in the depths of the spirit world. The sea beyond the ship's side was filled with mist, and the water surface was still as black as ink, but the storm had subsided, and the terrible lost home was also gone. It has disappeared. This can't help but give people an illusion, as if the previous storm and even the collapse frontier of reality were brought by that ghost ship, and now all the disasters have disappeared with the departure of that ship. Away from the White Oak, Lawrence thought of the frightening legends about the lost home, and Captain Duncan Abu Normer, the fleet that was swallowed up by the frontier of reality more than a century ago, and the ship that sank into the deep sea during the encounter with the lost home. A ship at sea suddenly felt that this was not impossible, but in any case, now that the lost homeland had left, the surrounding sea area had temporarily returned to calm. Although it was still in the dangerous depths of the spirit world, at least he and his crew had a chance to breathe. Next, Lawrence must determine exactly what the lost took from the White Oak or left behind. And it must be determined as soon as possible. Without ruling out all the hidden dangers, he dare not let the boat float to the real world rashly, because some things brought out from the spirit world will cause terrible pollution in the real world. But if he stays in the depths of the spirit world for too long, he and his crew will still be irreversibly affected. Hearing the noise from the deck, Lawrence suddenly raised his head from his thoughts. He looked at the pastor who was sitting in front of the incense burner, whose face had improved a little, with a very serious expression. "Mr. Ron, our current, how is the stability?" The pastor coughed twice, and then took out a small compass with exquisite shape and many sea symbols and sacred symbols engraved on the surface. After pressing the metal cover with a snap, the pointer on the compass immediately rotated rapidly, and finally stabilized. Stopped at a certain position. "We stay on the surface of the spiritual world, slightly closer to the real world, and the influence from the depths is very weak." The pastor looked at the state of the compass pointer, his expression suddenly a little confused. "It's strange, we are completely stable here. When the holy relic is closed, there is almost no sinking. Perhaps the hit of the lost lands knocked us onto a safe route." Lawrence smiled wryly and shook his head, wanting to liven up the atmosphere with a cold joke. "I heard that there are some subtleties in the spirit world, a balance that frees real world stuff from deeper pulls, Mr. Captain, this joke is too cold," the pastor said, coughing twice, although he has recovered, "but his condition is not good at all. Cough, cough. Anyway, what happened today, it must be reported to the church. The appearance of the lost homeland is no small matter. In the past few decades, there have always been reports of encounters with the lost homelander, but it was later confirmed that it was just the crew's nonsense or a group hallucination caused by an out-of-control vision. But today we really witnessed it, goddess. When you returned to Prand, you'd better make mental preparations that you won't be able to sail again in the near future. I understand neither the church nor the city-state authorities will allow a ship that has just encountered a vision disaster to return to the sea. This is for the safety of everyone, and I have to report more than just the church. The city-state, the Explorers Association. Alas, and my terrible wife. Captain Lawrence pressed his forehead hard and waved his hand after a long sigh. I won't talk about this. You need to rest now until you return to the port. Every ship needs the blessing of the goddess. The pastor nodded lightly, and soon, the first officer who had just left also returned to the cab. There are not too many people on board, and there are not many people on board, the first mate reported immediately without waiting for the captain to ask questions. Mechanics, they can accurately read the names of the gods they believe in, they are living people. No one is missing? Lawrence's eyes widened. This should be good news, but he couldn't believe the situation reported by the first mate. Where is the holy emblem beacon? The holy object is also normal. The first officer nodded immediately. The navigator is preparing incense and essential oils and is waiting for your order to restart the holy object. Lawrence listened in amazement and couldn't help muttering softly again. He really let the ship go? Good luck favors us, Captain. The first mate spread his hands. We didn't lose anything. Maybe that scary ghost captain just happened to pass by, or maybe even bumped into it accidentally. Do you believe this? Lawrence immediately glared at his first mate. If good luck really favored us, we would never have met. Just as he was halfway through his words, there was a rush of footsteps from outside the door, and then someone pushed open the door of the cab, and the sweaty bosun appeared in front of Lawrence. This tall man, his face was full of horror. Captain, Anomaly 99 is gone. The cab fell silent instantly, and everyone was looking at each other, but for some reason, Lawrence suddenly felt relieved amidst the brief shock. That's great. After the encounter with the lost country, something is finally found on board, so that's great. But then he controlled the expression on his face, and as he walked towards the door, he hurriedly ordered the first mate to take over the steering wheel, and ordered the bosun to lead the way. Hasty footsteps sounded in the cabin corridor of the White Oak, and soon, Lawrence, led by the boatswain, reached the deepest part of the steamship. A special cabin appeared before his eyes. The door of this cabin is engraved with dense mystic symbols. The heavy and dark door seems to be cast from a whole piece of black iron, and the mysterious symbols extend from the edge of the door frame to the corridor, vaguely as if to form some kind of a closed cage to restrain the things kept in the cabin. Lawrence glanced at the gate, confirmed that there were no signs of damage to the gate and the symbols around it, and then looked up at the top. The sacred relic room where the holy emblem beacon is placed is right above the seal room, and the beacon is to ensure that the ship's the key to not being affected by the deep layer is also the second layer of insurance to maintain the seals. Even if it is closed, it should be able to ensure the integrity of the barriers between the seals. But with both barriers intact, the thing in the sealed room, the most critical cargo escorted by the White Oak on this voyage, Anomaly 099, the dull coffin, disappeared. Lawrence took a deep breath, stepped forward and opened the door of the sealed room, and pushed the heavy door open forcefully. In the sealing room, the lights were bright, and the gas lamps hanging on the 4 pillars illuminated the center of the room almost without blind spots. But the goods that should have been placed there had disappeared, leaving only a few vertical and horizontal lines in place. Intertwined chains, and some off-white ash scattered on the surrounding ground. The voice of the boatswain came from behind Lawrence. According to the sealing requirements of Anomaly 099, the lights in this room are always maintained, and every 2 hours a crew member will come in to re-strengthen the chains around the coffin and the floor of the room. The ashes were sprinkled, but when that ghost ship appeared, due to the chaotic situation, the sailor who was supposed to be on duty did not enter the room in time, and he was almost 7 minutes late, only to find that Anomaly 099 had disappeared. Just 7 minutes late won't cause that thing to get out of control. At best, it's a change in the weakening of the seal. At worst, it's just a coffin running around in this room. There are layers of seals and holy emblems. Imprisonment is not a decoration. Lawrence frowned and shook his head. The current situation is that it disappeared. The cargo left the ship, and it has nothing to do with the sailor. The bosun's expression was a little nervous. Then you mean it must be the lost country, Lawrence said in a deep voice. The captain took away Anomaly 099. Speaking of this, he paused, and then sighed softly. Perhaps we should be thankful that the lost country has always taken away what it wanted, and the captain came here for Anomaly 099, not us. Life. The bosun looked at his captain's face, then at the empty seal room, and hesitantly asked after a long time, then we have lost such an important cargo. How should we report to the city-state authorities? Lawrence glanced at the bosun and patted him on the shoulder vigorously. The lost home is a natural disaster, and we have marine insurance. Will the insurance company pay for this? If they don't pay, let the Explorers Association issue a new reward for the lost home captain. Are you a little anxious? Shut up. Chapter 7. Dull. The blazing green flames were gradually fading away, and the surrounding sea surface was beginning to calm down. After confirming from Goathead that the lost homeland had left the dangerous waters and could sail on its own, Duncan took his hands off the dark steering wheel. He was now lowering his head, and what caught his eyes was his body that had been restored to flesh and blood, and the deck of the lost homeland that had returned to its original state after the green fire went out. But deep down, he had a feeling that many things were different. He could feel that something had changed the moment he grasped the wheel of the lost homeland. The green flame connected him to the ship and even to the sea. Even though the flame had subsided, he could still feel this invisible connection, and every detail of the ship under his feet. Duncan slowly closed his eyes. He heard a faint murmur coming from the deep and dim corridor of the lost homeland. The murmur was filled with an inexplicable sense of intimacy. He saw that the lantern in the captain's room had been lit at some point, and a pale light was dancing in the glass lampshade. He heard the sound of waves hitting the hull, and there seemed to be a deep gaze hidden under the waves. But when he tried to find the source of that gaze, the latter seemed to be consciously hiding its existence. Duncan opened his eyes and exhaled gently. The spiritual sail on the mast of the lost homeland, which was like gauze and mist, began to flutter. He walked towards the stairs leading to the deck, and the ropes beside the stairs began to wriggle back to both sides. He understood after choosing to take over the steering wheel, he was the true captain of the ship. Captain, we are rising from the edge of the spirit world and will soon return to the real world. The goat-headed voice came from the side, but this time it did not come through the copper tube used for communication on the ship, but appeared directly in Duncan's mind. When talking about business, it seemed much more serious and not so noisy. We are lucky. At the deepest point, we only wobbled at the bottom of the spirit world for a while, and were hardly affected by the depth of the abyss. The real world, the spiritual world, the deep sea, and the subspace that seemed to be even deeper. Duncan's mind was filled with these strange words that appeared one after another in front of him. He knew that these words were pointing to the reality of this strange world, but he still didn't know what the real meaning of these words was. However, when Duncan heard the goathead calling him captain, he always felt that there were some subtle changes in the other party's tone. He even suspected that even if he said Yu Ming at this moment, the goathead would still obey his orders. This was the change that occurred after he took the helm and successfully recovered from the green fire. But after a little hesitation, he did not make any rash attempt in this regard, nor did he ask Goathead about the spiritual world, the abyss, and the subspace. If it was a few days ago, he was indeed in a state of anxiety and uneasiness, and he was eager to figure out his situation at that time, but now he seemed to be in no hurry. In this world, there are other people, other ships, orderly societies, and other civilizations. This is enough for him to have many hopes for the future out of thin air, and even some plans that are still quite vague at present. In his wandering thoughts, Duncan recalled the details of his encounter with the ship that suddenly emerged from the thick fog, the conspicuous chimney on the ship, and the mechanical structures that appeared directly in his mind when it passed by the lost homeland. That's a mechanically powered ship, and the lost homeland looks like a sailing warship from the last era, Duncan muttered to himself, but it's not completely a mechanical ship. There were some cabins of unknown significance on the ship, which were arranged as if they were some kind of sacrificial scene. Many strange patterns and symbols could be seen on the keel of the ship, which looked like decorations but were more than necessary decorations. Goathead, Duncan suddenly said. He didn't know the name of the goathead, so he subconsciously said the name in his mind. When we intersected with the ship just now, the man, who looked like the captain, yelled at me. What did he say? The goathead seemed to be unconcerned by the captain's address to him. He accepted it readily and quickly replied, the wind and waves were too strong, so I couldn't hear clearly. You didn't hear it clearly either? Duncan frowned. I always felt that his expression was so tragic, as if he was ready to die with me. What he shouted must be something very important. Wanting to die with you is a normal human reaction, especially for sailors at sea. It is not worth making a fuss about. And their roars, before the ant trying to shake the tree, do not need your attention. The goat-headed man's reply seemed very natural. Duncan, who was walking up the stairs to the deck, almost stumbled. He trembled in astonishment. Wanting to die with me is a normal human reaction. As soon as he finished saying this, he felt something was wrong, because it seemed to expose the loopholes in his identity as the captain and that he did not know enough about his own situation. Perhaps it was because the green fire just now consumed too much energy, or it could be that the feeling of being one with the lost homeland weakened his vigilance. In any case, it made Duncan a little nervous for a moment, but the goathead seemed not to notice it at all. It's normal for them to fear you, the goat-headed man said with a bit of pride. Anyone who sails on the vast sea should fear you, just like they fear the old gods, and the shadows in the warp. Speaking of shadows, you know what an outstanding engineer, maybe an agriculturist or gourmet once said. Duncan wisely did not take up the topic, because he was worried that he would not be able to explain it if the topic continued. Of course, the more important reason was that he really did not want to pay attention to the goat-headed man, because as long as someone responded to the other party, its noise level would increase exponentially, and the next second, his attention was diverted by another thing on the deck. What is this? Duncan stood on the edge of the deck, looking at the thing at the door of the captain's room in astonishment. It was a wooden box that was more than a person's length long. It looked very well made. The unknown dark wood was tightly pieced together and then riveted and reinforced with gold-like metal. Complex patterns could be seen engraved on the edge of the box, which looked like words or deliberately distorted hieroglyphs. This box was definitely not something on the lost homeland. Duncan hadn't seen it when he left the captain's room before. The goat-headed man was silent for a moment before speaking. I don't know it, but it should be a trophy-loot? Duncan didn't react immediately. He walked around the box twice. Why does this thing look like a coffin, but it's much more exquisite than an ordinary coffin? Wait, loot, you mean this thing was taken from the ship just now? It's a successful hunt, Captain, the goat-headed man said in a serious tone, with a compliment in between. You always return with a full load on every voyage, which is normal. Duncan opened his mouth subconsciously, thinking that he had no intention of taking anything off the ship, so how could this be considered a hunt or a full load? But on second thought, he was afraid that saying this would not be in line with his image as a captain. More importantly, the mechanical ship had already disappeared in the depths of the sea fog. Thinking of the white-bearded captain staring at him with bloodshot eyes as if he wanted to die together with him, he thought that there was no way to send this thing back, so he could only suppress all the words in his stomach. He stood in front of the ornate wooden box that looked like a coffin, and noticed that the lid seemed loose and looked like it could be opened with just one hand. After hesitating for a moment, he put his hand on the lid of the wooden box. At least, he wanted to figure out what he had brought onto the boat during his spiritual boat racing just now. His body was stronger than he had imagined, and the lid was not as heavy as he had imagined. He only exerted a little force and the dark-looking lid appeared to crack, and then was completely opened by him. Duncan looked inside the box, stunned. One person. In the wooden box, a beautiful young woman was lying quietly. Her long silver-white hair was spread inside the box like mercury, her face was exquisite and flawless, and she had a kind of noble and transcendent demeanor. She was wearing a gorgeous purple-black court dress, her hands folded in front of her, as if she was in a long sleep. As perfect as a doll. No, this is really a puppet. While observing carefully, Duncan suddenly noticed the other parties in human joint structure. Chapter 8. The Sun. A puppet so delicate and lifelike that Duncan could hardly tell it apart at first glance. She lay quietly in the gorgeous wooden box, like a lady sleeping in a coffin, waiting for someone to wake her up. Duncan really felt that the other party would wake up in the next second. But this was just an illusion. The doll just lay quietly in the box, with no reaction to the surrounding environment. Duncan observed this strange thing vigilantly and carefully. There was nothing strange about a puppet in itself, but the appearance that was too close to a real person and the coffin-like wooden box made him instinctively feel a sense of danger. When he thought about how the box inexplicably appeared on the lost homeland, it was no wonder that he became alert. After observing for a long time, Duncan finally confirmed that the gorgeous Gothic doll in the box would not suddenly jump up and give him a surprise. He was slightly relieved, and then he frowned and asked Goathead, "What do you think is going on?" "This should be the important cargo escorted by the previous ship," the Goathead replied immediately. Although it had previously stated that it did not recognize the strange wooden box that suddenly appeared on the deck, it was obviously more experienced in maritime affairs than Duncan, the fake captain. There are symbols pointing to gods on the surface of the wooden box, and there are pins around the box for fixing chains, which may mean that it was once in a sealed state. Transporting sealed objects on the vast ocean is an extremely risky thing. That ship seems to have some background. Seal? Duncan's eyelids jumped subconsciously, and then he looked at the lid of the box that he had completely opened. The lid was broken when he came to the lost homeland, so he could easily push it. Although he didn't understand things like seals, he believed that the seal of this thing must have failed. So this thing is dangerous? It's dangerous for ordinary people who are vulnerable, but I don't think it will pose any threat to you. This kind of abnormality that can be sealed with special techniques cannot resist the power of Captain Duncan. Duncan remained silent, his expression serious, but his mind was full of thoughts. Goathead's compliment sounded quite pleasing to him. If he was really Captain Duncan, he might actually believe it, but he was not, so he was very nervous now. Because Goathead's words have made it clear that the puppet lying in the coffin is a dangerous item. It's just that it can't threaten the real captain. Although he now bears the title of Captain Duncan, and even seems to have occupied the other party's body and mastered some of his power, Zhu Ming is quite self-aware. He does not think that this will make him the same as the real Captain Duncan. He knew too little about this world, this ship, and even his current body. In addition, he also keenly noticed that a new strange word appeared in Goathead's words just now: abnormal. Abnormal is unconventional. It sounds like a very common word, but the special emphasis in Goathead's words made him vaguely realize that this word seems to have a special meaning here. Perhaps, in this world, the word abnormal not only means beyond the ordinary, but also refers to a certain type of thing. For example, a doll lying in a coffin. Unfortunately, he had no good reason to ask about something that should be common sense here. After feeling that he still needed to carefully collect intelligence and accumulate knowledge, Duncan frowned and took one last look at the puppet, as if he had made up his mind. I should throw it back into the sea. There was a hint of hesitation in his heart when he said this, especially when he was looking at the doll. This hesitation was particularly obvious. This was certainly not for a simple reason like this doll is beautiful, but because she really looked too much like a living person sleeping in a coffin. When Duncan thought about throwing it back into the sea, he even felt like he was throwing a living person off the boat. But this hesitation eventually strengthened his determination, because he already knew that there were many strange and bizarre things in this world. Although he had only encountered the lost homeland in this world so far, even on this ship, he had seen a talking goathead, a mast that could hoist its own sail, a ship light that never went out, as well as the strange and dangerous sea, the frightening spirit world, and the endless sea fog. And just now, he bumped into a mechanical ship that was transporting sealed objects on this strange sea, and the things that the ship was escorting were strangely landed on the deck of the lost homeland. As a rational and cautious person, he couldn't keep something that was likely to contain strange and dangerous powers just because the doll looked pretty. Regretful as he was, Duncan finally firmly closed the lid of the coffin. Because he was still worried, he found nails and a hammer in the cabin and carefully put another circle of iron nails on the coffin. Finally, he pushed the coffin containing the puppet to the edge of the deck. The voice of the goat-headed man came into his ears. You can dispose of your spoils as you please, but I will still respectfully and humbly make a suggestion. You don't need to be so cautious. The lost homeland has not increased its spoils for a long time. Shut up. Duncan simply pinched the goat's head and cut off the balabala. The goat head fell silent, and Duncan kicked the coffin hard, kicking it directly into the sea. The heavy wooden box fell straight down from the edge of the deck and landed directly in the sea, which had returned to its normal color. It floated up from the water with a dull sound and gradually drifted towards the stern of the lost hometown. Duncan watched the box drifting away with the waves, and only breathed a sigh of relief when it was completely obscured by the stern of the ship. Then he raised his head and looked into the distance, and saw that the mist on the sea had completely dissipated, and the blue sea was slowly rising and falling around the lost homeland. The ship has completely left the spiritual world and returned to the real dimension. On the nearby sea, there was no trace of the mechanical ship that had briefly encountered the lost homeland. Duncan frowned slightly and made a simple estimate of the time it would take for the two ships to meet and the speed of each ship. According to the current situation on the sea, the ship should not disappear from sight so quickly. Is this also because of this strange sea? Or is it related to the so-called spiritual voyage? Duncan began to murmur in his heart, but soon his attention was attracted by other things. He saw a ray of golden light suddenly appear from the depths of the dark clouds that had never dispersed over the sea. The bright golden sunlight gradually filled the sky, and the clouds that looked like thick curtains gradually dissipated as if being brushed away by invisible hands. The sea surface that had been gloomy for who knows how long was gradually illuminated by the sunlight. Duncan stood on the bow of the lost homeland, staring at the scenery of the dispersing clouds with wide eyes. At this moment, he suddenly felt an inexplicable touch. Ever since he learned of the existence of this side many days ago, and since the first time he explored this strange ship, the lingering dark clouds have always shrouded the entire ocean, to the point that he almost believed that there was no sunshine in this world at all, and that this world was always shrouded in dark clouds. He had been away from the sunshine for too long. Even across the door, in Zhu Ming's single apartment, the thick fog outside the window had long blocked the sun. But now, the boundless sea has cleared up. After being away from the sun for a long time, he finally felt like he was seeing the light of day again in the world this side. Duncan subconsciously took a deep breath and opened his arms towards the direction of the sunlight. The thick clouds quickly dissipated and faded away as if in response. At the brightest moment of the sky, a huge sphere shrouded by countless twisted golden light streams appeared in Duncan's eyes. All of Duncan's expressions froze at the moment he opened his arms to welcome the sunshine. He stared at the sky. The sunlight was dazzling, but not as dazzling as he was familiar with. He could clearly see the object hanging in the sky, its spherical shell that seemed to have countless densely packed lines, the brilliant light streams emanating from it, and against the background of the interweaving of light streams, there were two slowly rotating circular ring structures distributed in concentric circles with the central sphere as the center. Duncan narrowed his eyes. He could vaguely distinguish that the two circles seemed to be connected by countless fine and complex runes, as if some supreme power had engraved eternal constraints in the sky, imprisoning the sun in the sky. Duncan failed to embrace the sunshine he had longed for. There is no sunshine in this world. What is that? He whispered, his voice low and cold. Of course it's the sun, Captain. Goathead's voice was as calm as ever. Oh my God. I will try my best to maintain a double update these days. Until my stockpiled manuscripts are exhausted or my energy can no longer keep up. 23,333 Chapter 9 going and returning the sun is bright. If that glowing object high in the sky is really the sun, then its sunlight is bright indeed. Duncan didn't know how long he stared at the sky until his eyes became sore and unbearably sore that he finally looked away from the clouds. However, the posture of the sun was still deeply imprinted on his retina and the depths of his mind, even if he closed his eyes. When he closed his eyes, he could still clearly recall its appearance, the sphere emitting a faint golden light, the twisted and scattered light flow around the sphere, and the concentric ring structure quietly running around the sphere. The sun is not like this. The sun should not be like this in the world he is familiar with. Even under the sky of alien stars, the stars hanging high in the sky will not look like this. But now he had to accept the truth. He is in a foreign land farther away than imagined. Even the sun turned into something he couldn't understand. Duncan turned his head subconsciously and looked at the door in front of the captain's cabin. Push the door back in and you'll be back in the room he's lived in for so many years, back in his bachelor pad. But outside that room, the thick fog had already covered the whole world, and the hometown he was familiar with, in a sense only the last 30-square-meter hut remained. It seems that the home that can be returned as long as the door is opened is actually just another boat sailing alone. During the long silence, the voice of the goat's head suddenly entered Duncan's ears. Captain, where are we going next? Do you have any sailing plans? Sailing plan? How could Duncan have that kind of thing, although he also wanted to immediately formulate a complete plan to explore the world and finalize the next voyage, but he didn't even have a normal sea chart at hand, let alone I don't know what kind of land there is in this world, what kind of power it has, and I don't know whether this endless ocean has an end. He had only just learned how to pilot the Lost Home a few hours ago. But he still pondered, and after a few minutes he said in his heart, where did the ship that collided with the Lost Home come from? Do you want to go to those city-states? The voice of the goat's head was a little surprised, and then dissuaded. I suggest that you better not approach the waterways controlled by those city-states. At least not now. Although you are the great Captain Duncan, the current state of the Lost Country is not as good as it used to be after all, and the garrison navy and holy sea guards of those city-states will definitely do their best to resist your attack. Duncan was a little speechless for a while. He suddenly wanted to know what the Captain Duncan he replaced had done in the past, so that it seemed that showing his face in the world could instantly stimulate 25 people the group originally. And listening to the euphemistic meaning in Goathead's words, Duncan also realized that the current state of the lost homeland and his captain does not seem to be as good as it usually compliments the captain of the Ghost and his ship are on the ocean. The reason is actually afraid to return to the port of the civilized world? Another way of saying exile is to travel to the end of the world. Duncan was a little distressed. He desperately needed to find a way to understand this world. He had to find a way to get in touch with the civilized society of this world, whether it was to survive here for a long time or to return to the civilized society he was familiar with. Hometown, he can't continue to wander in this endless ocean, but the problem is, the civilized society of this world doesn't seem to think so. In the eyes of the locals, Captain Duncan is a world boss who wanders outside the main city. Once he appears in the field of vision, he must pull a group of 25 people. Duncan sighed. As long as there is a book on the lost home, he will not be so passive. His only source of information here is the nagging goat head, but he dare not at this stage expose yourself too much in front of that goat's head. But then again, why is there not even a single book on this huge ship? The lonely and long sailing journey is an extremely stressful environment for people living at sea. People always need some means of relieving stress. Ordinary sailors may not have much time to read for entertainment, but the dignified Captain Duncan, it can't be illiterate, right? You know, captain is a technical job that requires a high level of knowledge. Even the most rude and savage pirates must at least have a captain who can understand charts, astrology, and calculate routes. Feeling puzzled in his heart, Duncan asked casually. He asked very cautiously, trying to act as if he mentioned it casually. But the answer of the go-head was without hesitation. Books? Reading at sea is a dangerous thing. Those guys in the deep and subspace are waiting for a hole in the mind of mortals all the time, and the only safe reading materials are the classics issued by the Holy See. That thing is safe, but reading it is as boring as washing the deck. Aren't you always not interested in things from the Holy See? Duncan raised his eyebrows immediately. How could it be life-threatening to read a book at sea? Are only the classics of the Holy See safe to read? What is wrong with this boundless sea? It feels as if he has acquired a little more knowledge about the world, but it is followed by new doubts. Duncan can only suppress these new doubts in his heart, and he comes to the end of the ship's side, looking at the endless sea in the distance with the sky. That round of golden sun sheds 1,000 Jang rays of light, and the undulations like fine gold leaf are reflected on the sea surface. If you don't consider the strange appearance of the sun, this is indeed a beautiful scene. I want to hear your suggestion, Duncan finally said cautiously to the goat's head after much deliberation. I'm a little tired of this aimless voyage. Maybe as soon as he was halfway through his words, a strange feeling suddenly came from the bottom of his heart. This feeling came from the connection between him and the lost country, as if some foreign object suddenly touched the ship. Immediately afterwards, he heard another boom from the direction of the stern, as if something heavy had hit the deck. Duncan frowned, and immediately pulled out the loaded flintlock gun at his waist, and the one-handed longsword with the other hand, and then quickly ran towards the direction where the sound came from. After a while, he came to the poop deck, and he was dumbfounded by something lying quietly on the deck. It was that gorgeous wooden box like a coffin. It's that weird puppet. A creepy feeling surged into Duncan's heart. He stared at the box that was still wet on the surface, as if the latter would suddenly open by itself in the next second. Then he noticed that the nails around the wooden box lid had it was gone. Those were the nails he had hammered into the box before throwing it into the sea, so it should be very strong. After vigilantly confronting the box beside the box for several minutes, Duncan finally made up his mind. He held the flintlock tightly in one hand, and with the other hand, he used his long sword to penetrate the gap in the wooden box's lid, and then he slammed it hard. Pry open. The ornate lid creaks open, and the inanimate goth doll still lies inside, surrounded by a red velvet lining, like a sleeping princess. Duncan stared at the puppet for several seconds, and said in a serious tone he believed he had shown enough majesty at this moment. If you are alive, then get up and talk to me. After saying it twice in a row, the puppet still remained motionless. Duncan looked at her with a serious expression, and finally said lightly, "Very well, then I can only send you back." After finishing speaking, he put the lid back on without hesitation. Then he took tools and nailed a circle of coffin nails in a crisscross pattern on the box, hook to secure its cover firmly. After finishing all this, Duncan straightened up and clapped his hands in satisfaction. He looked at the coffin which was tied up by himself and added a circle of coffin nails, and nodded slightly. This time, you should not be able to get out of the coffin. After speaking, he kicked the box into the sea again without hesitation. Watching the box falling into the water, and seeing the box rising and falling with the current and gradually drifting away, Duncan breathed a sigh of relief, then turned and left the stern. But just halfway there, he suddenly turned his head and looked in the direction where the box drifted away again. The wooden box is still drifting on the sea. Duncan nodded, turned his head and continued to walk away, then turned back suddenly. The box was still floating on the sea, and it had already floated far, far away. Maybe I should put a cannonball or something in it so it can sink, Duncan muttered, then turned around and walked slowly towards the direction of the captain's cabin. You were a little harsh on that lady. The voice of the goat's head came in his head. Shut up, you call it cursed doll, madam? It does look like a cursed doll. But what curse in the infinite sea can compare to the lost country and the great Captain Duncan? Captain, that lady is actually quite gentle and harmless, Duncan. Why is the goat head so proud when he talks about the curse and notoriety of the lost country and Captain Duncan? Perhaps sensing Duncan's bad mood in the silence, the goat's head immediately changed the subject. Captain, you said earlier that you wanted to hear my advice. Specifically, let's talk about it later. I need to rest for a while. The previous sailing on the lost country in the spirit world drained my energy, and you keep quiet. Yes, Captain. The goat's head fell silent, and Duncan returned to the captain's cabin. He came to the nautical table and glanced casually at the chart. In the next second, his eyes suddenly froze. There seemed to be a slight change in the sea chart. The gray-white patches that seemed to be alive and wriggling that originally covered the entire blueprint seemed to have dissipated a little bit, and the sea around the lost country was becoming clearer. This thing, is it updating the information of the surrounding sea area in real time as the lost home sails? Duncan immediately came to the nautical table, paying full attention to the subtle changes on the chart. But his state of concentration was soon interrupted. In the depths of the mind, The lost homeland again sent the signal of contact with foreign objects, and immediately after, Duncan heard a boom sound from the deck behind the captain's cabin. Chapter 10 Elegance is not so elegant anymore. The coffin is back again. On the stern deck of the lost homeland, Duncan looked expressionlessly at the gorgeous wooden box lying quietly in front of him. Drops of water from the edge of the wooden box fell at his feet, confirming that his memory of throwing the wooden box into the sea was not false, and that this thing was indeed floating in the sea not long ago. Such a strange situation is enough to make people feel cold, but for some reason, Duncan's mood at this moment is calmer than he imagined. Perhaps it is because he is on this extremely strange ghost ship, or because he has experienced a thrilling spiritual drift and a collision accident not long ago, or perhaps because he has dealt with an equally strange goat head for several days. Duncan seems to have become immune to the bizarre supernatural phenomena in this world. In fact, as early as the last time he threw this cursed doll into the sea, he vaguely guessed that things would not end so easily. He lowered his head and found that the iron nails and the circle of chains that had been nailed around the coffin had disappeared. Then he bent down and pried open the lid of the coffin with the pirate's sword in his hand again. The gorgeous Gothic doll still lay quietly in the center of the red velvet lining with his hands folded, quiet and elegant. But this time Duncan clearly noticed that the other party's skirt seemed to be wet by the sea water. A slight smell of the sea came from the inside of the coffin lid. So far, this strange doll seems to have no other extraordinary or dangerous behavior except for returning again and again. But just going and returning is already a standard attribute of cursed items. Duncan looked at the doll expressionlessly for a while, and suddenly broke the silence with a smile. I suddenly want to satisfy my curiosity. After the voice fell, he turned and walked towards the cabin entrance not far away, and left the doll on the deck with confidence. Although personally he was very wary of the puppet and didn't want to keep it by his side, but based on his understanding of the lost homeland and the goat head, he knew that temporarily placing the puppet on the deck wouldn't be a big problem. Even if she suddenly attacked and hurt people, the many living things on the ship would be enough to deal with it. And he had to do some preparation work during this time. Duncan walked through the stern deck, opened the wooden door leading to the lower deck, stepped on the wooden stairs that had been there for who knows how many years, and came to the cabin under the deck with ease. This place belongs to the upper cabin. In the cabin, where the artillery is placed, the old-style front-loading artillery lies quietly on both sides of the cabin. The moldy and blackened wooden boards cover the firing ports next to them, and the black gunpowder barrels and solid iron ball-like shells are piled between the gun positions, looking as if they have been piled up for a century. Duncan's eye swept over these things that looked quite old at first glance, and suddenly thought of something in his mind. On this ship, he did not see a second human figure besides himself, so who was operating these cannons? Could it be that just like the lost home itself, these cannons could also be loaded and fired by themselves? What about the freshwater tanks on the ship? Are they also replenished by themselves? What about the damaged parts? Are they also repaired by themselves? Or does this ship really have the concept of damage? Questions popped up in his mind one by one, but he couldn't think of how to explain them. Duncan knew very well that he knew too little about this ship. Although he had explored it to a certain extent in the past few days, he only had a general understanding of its upper structure. Those deeper areas were far more bizarre and more fearful than the upper layers. In addition, he had always hoped to leave his bachelor apartment and return to the normal world on Earth, and did not focus his main energy on the lost home, which led to his lack of motivation for action here. But now, he suddenly became more curious about the ship, or had a greater sense of control. This is his ship, he should understand this lost homeland. This may also be the change after holding the steering wheel. Duncan shook his head, temporarily put the subsequent exploration plan in his mind, and then came to the place where the shells were piled. A moment later, Duncan, holding several cast iron shells, returned to the stern deck. As he thought, the cursed doll in the coffin was still lying in the wooden box. Did she make any movement just now? No, the voice of the goat head came immediately. It seemed to have been holding it back for too long, and it crackled as soon as it opened its mouth. This lady is as quiet as her appearance. You should believe my judgment. She is gentle and harmless to you. Since she has returned to the ship again and again, it may mean that there is some connection between her and her coffin and the lost homeland. A great gardener once shut up. Oh. Duncan stared at the doll in the coffin expressionlessly. It was unknown whether she was really unable to move or was still pretending to be asleep. Duncan didn't care anyway. He was going to satisfy his curiosity. The cast iron shells, which were like solid iron balls, were extremely heavy. When executing traders on the ship, tying one of these shells was enough to kill even the most experienced sailors. Duncan put 4 in the coffin, then returned to the cabin and moved another 4. 8 cannonballs filled almost all the remaining space in the wooden box. The gorgeous and elegant Gothic doll was now surrounded by a circle of cannonballs. It looked very full of martial virtue. Elegance is not so elegant anymore, and evil is really evil. Duncan sealed the lid of the coffin again, and then pushed the wooden box to the edge of the deck with considerable effort. Even with his current physical strength, it was not easy to complete this operation. Finally, he flew up and kicked the coffin into the sea. There was a heavy sound of falling into the water, and the gorgeous wooden box plunged straight into the water and sank. Duncan still stood quietly on the edge of the deck, staring at the place where the wooden box fell into the water, and did not move for a long time. The goat-headed voice came into his mind. "Captain, have you regretted it? If you regret throwing away this loot, the homeless ship can try to use the anchor to fish out the box again, although it does not belong to the anchor." Correct usage, but anchor said it could be tried. Shut up. But I see you have been standing at the edge of the deck for a long time. Shut up. Oh, Duncan exhaled softly. In front of the dog-legged goat-head, he could never admit that his toes hurt, so he was in pain for several minutes on the edge of the deck, trying hard to maintain the seriousness that a majestic captain should have. In the end, he was a little bit doubtful that he looked like a stone. He slowly returned to the upper cabin below the deck. After waiting quietly for a few more minutes, and guessing that the time was almost up, Duncan suddenly walked to the stern area of the upper cabin, opened the observation window between the two stern cannons, and paid close attention to the movements on the sea. The goat-head was quiet for a short time, and then he couldn't help it anymore. "Captain, what are you?" While staring at the sea with all his concentration, Duncan replied without raising his head, "I'm very curious about how the cursed doll came back." Because she's a cursed doll? I appreciate your attitude of not asking for explanations, but I think that even if it is a cursed doll, there must be some process for her to return to the ship. She wants to pretend that she is dead, but she returns to the ship again and again. I think there must be a reason, and the other party must have the ability to communicate. But now that she refuses to communicate, I can only find a way to catch her behavior and forcefully establish communication with that guy. Listening to Duncan's explanation, the goat-head was silent for 2 seconds and suddenly asked tentatively, "Captain, you seem to have suddenly become more interested?" "Ah, this is really a good sign. Since you woke up last time, my mood has never been very good, and I seem to have lost interest in many things. Your loyal first mate and second mate." "Shut up." "Oh." After the goat-head calmed down, Duncan was still paying close attention to the movements on the sea, and in his sight, there was only calm in the sea towards the stern of the ship. The coffin seemed to have really sunk into the deep sea and never appeared again. But with the experience of the first 2 times, Duncan was extra patient this time. He silently counted the time, waited silently, observed silently, and allowed time to flow. He didn't seem to notice that he was actively expecting the doll to reappear. Then, a small black shadow really appeared in his field of vision. During the ups and downs of the waves, the black shadow rushed into Duncan's eyes. It was a beautiful wooden box, breaking through the sea like a lonely boat in the wind and waves, and the beautiful Gothic doll was standing in the wooden box, holding her gorgeous coffin lid in an imposing posture, and rushing forward in the wind and waves, rowing desperately from left to right. A Gothic doll standing in a coffin and waving the coffin lid to ride the wind and waves. Elegance is not so elegant anymore. The evil is really more evil than 8 cannonballs. Duncan was shocked. Oh my god. Chapter 11. Alice. Duncan felt that he would never forget this scene in his life. On the strange and dangerous vast sea, a gorgeous coffin was rising and falling with the waves, and a Gothic puppet driven by a mysterious force stood in the coffin, holding a huge coffin board in both hands, riding the wind and waves. And he didn't look very happy. This was too weird no matter how you looked at it. For a moment, Duncan didn't even know whether he should be surprised that the cursed doll was actually moving, or shocked by her overwhelming spirit of swinging the coffin board. He just felt that this scene was really contrary to his initial imagination. He had imagined several times how the other party got back to the ship, but he had never thought it would be such a scene. And in the moment that Duncan was stunned, the puppet had already arrived near the stern of the lost homeland. Although the tool she used was a coffin board, her paddling speed was astonishingly fast, and she had unusual dexterity and strength. Duncan carefully stuck his head out of the observation port and saw the puppet throw the coffin board into the coffin, then reach out and grab a piece of wood protruding from the stern of the boat, and begin to climb up quickly, so flexible and fast that it seemed as if an invisible rope was pulling her upwards, and the wooden box that looked quite heavy even floated up directly from the sea in an eerie way, floating beside the puppet as if it had lost its weight. Duncan quickly pulled his head back before the puppet noticed him. The doll obviously didn't notice that the captain of the ghost ship had been watching her secretly. She climbed up the towering stern of the lost homeland almost in the blink of an eye, flipped over, and jumped onto the deck, then waved her fingers in the air, allowing the coffin floating beside her to land steadily at her feet. Then she turned her head around, as if observing the situation near the deck. After confirming that there was no one around, she quickly tidied up her wet dress and began to climb into the coffin using her hands and feet. When he was halfway up, he was blocked by a pirate sword that suddenly appeared from the side. Then he heard the clicking sound of the flintlock hammer being raised. The puppet's movements froze instantly. She tried to turn her head, but saw a ghost captain with green flames all over his body standing beside her, staring at her coldly. The voice that seemed to come from the depths of the spirit world was cold and deep. "Oh, I caught you, puppet." In front of Duncan's eyes, the puppet trembled noticeably. She seemed frightened and wanted to dodge to the side instinctively, but her movements were a little out of shape in a hurry. Her upper body swayed, and Duncan heard a crisp click sound coming from the other shoulder and neck. Then her head fell off. In front of Duncan, a beautiful head fell from the puppet. Its long silver-white hair spread out in the sea breeze, then wrapped around the head and rolled down to his feet. The puppet's body still maintained the posture beside the coffin, ready to escape. One hand grasped blankly in the air, but the head stared at Duncan helplessly, its mouth opening and closing. "Help! Help! Help!" It is no exaggeration to say that Duncan's heart stopped beating at this moment, although he doubted whether his heart was still there when he was burned by the ghost flame. The scene of watching the puppet's head fall still shocked him. However, the blazing ghost flame obscured his horrified face at the moment, and his momentary hesitation in astonishment was regarded as some kind of indifference by the puppet. As a result, the puppet lady did not realize that the terrible Captain Duncan seemed to be more nervous than herself, and just kept repeating, "Help! Help!" The head fell off. Duncan finally reacted. He soothed his little heart that existed in his imagination at the moment, tried his best to control his movements and voice, and observed the puppet for a while with the utmost calmness and composure. He confirmed that although this cursed puppet had many weird aspects, she seemed to be more afraid of herself, the ghost captain, than her own weird nature. This fact was instantly clear to Duncan, who realized that he had to maintain his composure. He doesn't understand this world yet, let alone this cursed puppet. Before he can completely control the situation, the identity of the terrible Captain Duncan is his greatest reliance to ensure his safety. On the other hand, he couldn't just leave the puppet in front of him alone. Although the development of things did not quite match his initial expectations, judging from the results, the puppet could finally communicate with him. He put away the flintlock, while continuing to hold the sword in his other hand at close range. The flintlock with only one chance to shoot was obviously not as reliable as a sword, not to mention that the marksmanship he had hastily practiced was far from enough to make him an experienced gunman. Then he used his free hand to grab the puppet's head that had fallen to the ground. It was a very strange feeling. Even though he knew that the other party was just a cursed doll, the feeling of reaching out and grabbing a head still made Duncan feel a little uneasy. The slight warmth coming from the head almost made him want to throw it away. Too weird and strange. But he finally suppressed the strange feeling in his heart and looked at the head calmly. "Do you want me to put it back for you?" Since okay, do it yourself." Duncan nodded and casually handed the head to the puppet's hands that were grasping randomly in midair. Then he saw the hands catch his head very skillfully and deftly, tidy up his messy silver hair, adjust the angle, and put his head on the neck, accompanied by a crisp click. The ball joint closed tightly. The whole process went smoothly, and it was obviously not the first time this had been done. Then the puppet's somewhat stiff face quickly became lively. She blinked and let out a long breath. Alive. Duncan, no matter from which angle, he felt that he should complain, but thinking about his own character of Captain Duncan and the unknown background of the puppet in front of him, he finally nodded to the puppet expressionlessly. "Very good, now come with me. You have come to my ship again and again. We need to talk." As he spoke, he dispersed the ghost flames that were wrapped around his body and returned to his original appearance. Actively transforming into a spiritual form was a power he mastered after grasping the steering wheel of the lost hometown. However, this was something he had come into contact with in a hurry, and he was far from being proficient in it now, let alone being able to utilize this power. Apart from being able to use it to steer the boat, he didn't even know what other functions this thing had. He had released it just now just to create a strong image in front of the weird cursed doll, and to boost his own momentum. Now that the image has been established and the puppet is cooperating, there is no need to continue to consume energy by maintaining the flames. The cursed doll stood up from the coffin obediently, and then was surprised to see Duncan's process of returning to human form. She was stunned. "You are not a ghost?" Duncan glanced at her calmly and said, "If necessary, yes." The puppet raised one hand to support its head, and there seemed to be some awe in its eyes. Duncan didn't know what this girl was in awe of, but he could tell that her head still seemed unsteady. She might have almost been scared to death just now. He turned and walked towards the captain's room, and through the real-time connection with the lost homeland, he could feel that the puppet followed him obediently after hesitating for a second or two. As expected, the gorgeous and strange coffin also floated closely behind the doll, and she seemed to carry it wherever she went. A moment later, Duncan brought the cursed doll to the captain's room. Under the dim gaze of the wooden carved goat head, the ghost captain and the cursed doll sat across the navigation table from each other. Duncan sat in his dark armchair, while the doll lady opposite him used the coffin-like wooden box as a chair and sat on it gracefully and elegantly. She was indeed elegant and dignified. When she sat down and remained quiet, when she sat on a wooden box with her silver hair loose and wearing a gothic long dress, she was dignified and beautiful, like a work of art that should be placed in a palace and guarded by guards. Unfortunately, whenever Duncan saw her, he would think of how this lady had just ridden the wind and waves and split up to act separately. He sighed and returned to his cold and majestic look, looking into the eyes of the doll lady. Name? Alice. Race? A puppet. Profession? Puppet. Why are you asking these questions? Duncan thought for a moment and said, get some basic understanding. Chapter 12. The Ghost Captain and the Cursed Doll. On both sides of the large nautical table, Duncan, the captain of the lost country, sat facing the cursed doll Alice. The atmosphere between the two, although neither of them may be human, can be called rapport. The puppet lady who claimed to be Alice still looked a little nervous. Although the ghost captain in front of her had promised her temporary safety, in front of Duncan's natural pressure plus 10 face, even a cursed puppet would be too nervous. Obviously uneasy, she was sitting on the lid of her coffin, maintaining a dignified manner at the moment, but her fingers quietly pinching together and grabbing the hem of the skirt revealed her uneasiness. Duncan was silent for a while, observing the lady in front of him in thought. A puppet driven by an unknown power, a supernatural entity that is obviously not flesh and blood, but can walk and even have a certain body temperature. If it is placed in his hometown, it will be close to science and at least 3.5 episodes. Duncan didn't know what kind of existence a puppet like Alice belonged to in this world, but during the past few days with the goat's head, he also learned some information on the sidelines. He knew that although there are extraordinary visions in this world, but all kinds of supernatural things are not ordinary invisible things, and the puppet lady in front of her, Duncan guessed that she should belong to some kind of special existence even in this strange world. His guesses were not without merit. The mechanically powered ship that collided head-on with the lost country was new and had a well-trained crew, and he had seen it with his own eyes, despite the conditions of great fear. Many sailors on the ship are also sticking to their posts, and there are a lot of cabins and items whose purpose cannot be understood inside the ship. Many items are depicted with complex rune marks, and the style of those marks is similar to that of Alice. The symbols on the surface of the coffin are very similar. In other words, the purpose of such a cutting-edge ship is most likely to escort Alice, the cursed doll. Duncan adjusted his posture on the seat and stared at Alice with comfortable but serious eyes. There is no doubt that there is an extra guest on his boat. But from another angle, this lady doll doesn't seem to be a scary character. She seems to be quite timid. After all, she didn't say anything when she first met her. She was so frightened that she lost her head. Excuse me. Probably because Duncan's long silence and gaze brought too much pressure, Alice finally couldn't help but speak. And where are you from? Duncan finally withdrew his stressful gaze and asked in a more peaceful tone. Alice was obviously stunned for a moment, as if reflecting the meaning of Duncan's question, and after a few seconds, she tapped her finger on the gorgeous wooden box under her body. From here. Duncan's expression stiffened instantly. Of course I know you were lying in this box before. He coughed twice. But what I'm asking is where you come from. Place, understand? Do you have a hometown? Or something that can be called something from the place of departure? Alice thought about it again and shook her head calmly. I can't remember. Cannot remember? Where did the doll come from? Alice folded her hands on her lap and replied dignifiedly and seriously, most of my memories are lying in the box. Shipped to another location, occasionally vaguely felt walking or guarding outside the box. I also remember some whispered conversations with those guarding outside my wooden box. They used fear and nervous talking about something in the tone of Duncan raised his eyebrows. Talk about something? What are they talking about around you? Just some boring stuff. But I'm curious. Duncan said seriously. He believed that those things might really be just trivial things. But now he really needs to do everything possible to understand the world, even if it's the noisy gossip of ordinary people in this world also good. Well, the one I hear most often is a name, Anomaly 099. They seem to use that to refer to me and my crate, but I don't really like it. I have a name, Alice recalled said. Other than that, I occasionally heard them talking about seals and curses, but most of them are blurred. I would sleep when I was in the box, and I didn't listen to the movement outside very seriously. The puppet spoke unhurriedly, and then seemed to suddenly remember something, and added, "But I still remember what I heard recently. It should be before I came to your ship. Those in the wooden box diplomacy." The voice of the conversation frequently mentioned a place, the city-state of planned, which seems to be their destination. Should it be my destination too? Hulan city-state? Duncan looked inwardly and silently wrote down the name in his heart. He finally learned something useful again, although he didn't know when this useful information would come in handy. Then he raised his head and looked at the puppet lady in front of him again. "What else?" "Other than that, I just sleep most of the time, Captain," the doll lady said solemnly. "When you were locked in a big coffin-like box, there are still dizzy people around you. What else can you do if you don't sleep when the whispers are in your ears? Do you do sit-ups in the coffin?" The corner of Duncan's mouth twitched. She has a dignified demeanor and is an elegant beauty when her head is still on her head. But in fact she can not only paddle the coffin board to ride the wind and waves, but also suddenly burst out trash talk that chokes people to death. He quickly built a new image of Miss Alice in his mind. But on the surface, he still maintains the image of the calm and majestic Captain Duncan. He just hummed non-committally, and then said, "So, apart from being drowsy in the wooden box, you don't know anything about the outside world. You can neither tell me the changes in the world today, nor tell me where any port or city-state is." "I'm afraid that's the case, Captain." The puppet lady nodded solemnly, then opened her eyes slightly as if suddenly reacting, and looked at Duncan quite nervously. "So you are planning to throw me overboard again? Is it because I'm worthless?" Before Duncan could speak, he heard Alice continue to say, "Well, I understand, this is your ship after all, but can you not put shells in the box this time? Seriously, 8 shells, it's a little too much." It can be seen that the lady doll is not in a very good mood, but she doesn't dare to show it. Duncan was also very embarrassed. He was mainly embarrassed that when he stuffed the cannonballs into the box at the beginning, he didn't think about the situation of calmly discussing the matter with the person concerned. At that time, he only regarded Alice lying in the box as a standard horror. The cursed puppet in the film, all the pictures that popped up in his mind were towards this style of painting. How could he have thought that this cursed puppet didn't come out of the curse, but came out of the courtyard? So the preparations made in the early stage to fight against the horrible curse have now become embarrassing. But Duncan is good because he has a thicker skin, and the majestic and gloomy face is carved on his face like a knife and an axe. As long as the peripheral nerves are not short-circuited, he can still hold it, so he forcibly ignored the 8 shell belts. The embarrassment came, but I just shook my head calmly. "I haven't decided whether to throw you off the boat. After all, you always seem to have a way to get back on the boat. I'm just curious, why do you insist on throwing you over and over again? Back to the lost home? It can be seen that you are actually afraid of me and this ship. In that case, why don't you stay away from this danger? Is this ship called Lost Homeland? Well, I am indeed a little afraid of you and your ship, but compared to this, isn't the depths of the sea more dangerous?" The puppet lady quietly stared at the ghost in front of her. Captain, in her field of vision, behind this tall man is a boundless dark void. That darkness overlaps with the real scene in the cabin, as if the two worlds are forcibly superimposed. But compared to this huge, this suffocating shadow of nothingness, those things from the deeper part of the boundless sea made her feel more dangerous as anomaly 099. In this world, is there anything more frightening than the deep sea? Mum. Chapter 13. Long-term bed rest is not good for the cervical spine. The deep sea is something to fear. Alice is a doll, but she still has eyes that express emotion and changes in expression that are difficult to explain with common sense, so Duncan can clearly detect from the other party's expression that she is interested in the deep sea or something in the deep sea. The fear and resistance of these things, and then thinking of the spiritual world and the so-called frontier visions he saw in the sea before, he can easily realize that the vast ocean he is in is absolutely hidden. Fear. However, the lost homeland was sailing on this boundless ocean, and the mechanical ship that had hit in the spirit world was also sailing on this ocean. This can't help but make him curious about some more distant things. What is the land in this world like? In other words, is there normal land in this world? However, the puppet in front of her couldn't answer her own question, and most of the time Alice remembered was in a dazed state. According to Duncan's judgment, it should be the effect of some kind of sea lore suppression. He still remembers the situation in the cabin he observed through the huge perception of the lost home when he passed by the mechanical ship, those mysterious runes, the arrangement with strong religious symbols, and the engraved words on the outside of Alice's coffin. The symbols all mean one thing: her cursed doll must be deeply feared in civilized society. If Duncan looked at the doll girl in front of him meaningfully, the latter returned a calm look. To confirm again, "You don't remember where you came from at all, And you can't remember what you have experienced in the past, right? I don't remember, Alice replied seriously. I have been lying in this big box for as long as I can remember. I don't know why, but it seems that there is always a group of nervous people around me. I was afraid that I would come out of it, so I used various methods to seal the box. To be honest, when I think about it now, I suddenly feel that the circle of nails you nailed on the lid of my box before was quite friendly. Although you added it later. 8 shells, but at least you didn't fill them with lead, did you? Duncan didn't pay attention to Alice's trash talk this time, but continued to ask, then where did your name come from? Who gave you this name? If you really never left the box, and never met, why do you have a name when other people come into contact with it? Could it be that you gave it to yourself? Alice froze suddenly. She seemed to have really fallen into a daze, and remained in a daze for more than 10 seconds. Almost when Duncan was worried about whether the doll also had the setting of crash, the lady doll resumed her activities again. I don't remember. I knew from the beginning that my name was Alice, but I didn't come up with the name myself. She muttered to herself in confusion, subconsciously supporting her head with both hands, which made the corners of Duncan's eyes twitch, and he quickly stopped. Okay, forget it if you don't remember. You don't have to pull your head off, Alice. After that, Duncan asked the puppet lady in front of him many questions, but unfortunately, most of them had no results. As Miss Puppet herself said, most of the time since she became conscious she has passed in that coffin in a drowsy state, maintaining a state of alternating sleep and half awake. Little is known about the world, and the only knowledge comes from the conversations outside the coffin he heard while half asleep, and these trivial knowledge can hardly piece together the outline of this world for Duncan. But even so, Duncan was not without gains in the conversation with Alice. He confirmed at least a few things. In this world, there is a power structure called city-state. The city-state of Prand. It seemed to be a prosperous place, and sailors said in conversation that it had an important place on many sea routes. Secondly, Alice also has the title Anomaly 099, and this seems to be some kind of official title in the civilized world. As for the name Alice, she said so far, no one except herself and Duncan. It seems that there is no third person who knows. In the end, Alice has been being transferred from one city-state to another, and it seems that she is not the only abnormal who has been transferred in this way. During some journeys, she has heard those in charge of escorts mention in conversations words like other seal room. Based on this, Duncan boldly guessed that perhaps this action of constantly shifting the abnormality itself is also a necessary means to seal the anomaly and prevent it from breaking out of trouble. And it is obvious that the team responsible for transporting Anomaly 099 this time has had a bad luck, because of the lost home that appeared in the sky. The doll they escorted has already escaped. I just don't know what is so scary about this weird cursed doll, and what kind of damage she will cause if she escapes. After all, she seemed pretty harmless aboard the lost home. Frankly, Duncan was disappointed. He thought he had finally found an information channel that could help him understand the world, but he didn't expect that the guy lying in the coffin was as confused as himself. But when he glanced at Alice, who was still sitting quietly on the wooden box again, this disappointment faded a little. At least he now has someone else to talk to on the lost home. Although she seems to be a puppet, although it is scary when her head falls off, although she must have more secrets, although she occasionally pops up trash talk. But she's better than that noisy goat's head. And speaking of weird dangers, this boundless sea, this ship of lost homeland, and the strange things on this ship, which one looks safe? Even from the perspective of others, he, Captain Duncan, seems to be the most dangerous one in the boundless sea. Duncan breathed a sigh of relief. Unconsciously, his expression eased a little and asked with a gossiping attitude, I want to know, if I throw you overboard again, what will you do? Alice blinked. Are you still stuffing the shells this time? No. Is it still nailing? No. Is it filled with lead? No. I mean, if I refuse you to stay on board, then I'll paddle back again. Alice sat dignifiedly and said calmly, I don't want to be swallowed by this sea. At least there is a place to stay on this boat of yours. Duncan was so shocked by the frankness of this doll that he didn't know whether to say she was honest or thick-skinned for a while, and after careful consideration, he said, You can be more tactful anyway. You already know the answer, don't you? Alice said with a smile, But if I come back again, I might find a way to hide somewhere in the cabin so that you won't find out, so I won't run carelessly on the deck again. Yes. My recovery time is still short, and I didn't think thoroughly when I returned a few times before, but now I have experience. Duncan interrupted her. My perception is all over the ship, and I can even judge the position of every wave hitting the hull. Alice's words behind her were immediately choked back. Duncan continued to say calmly, and I can also choose to destroy you directly, and use a more thorough way to prevent you from continuing to pester me and my homeless. Miss Doll really didn't think about this possibility. She subconsciously opened her eyes wide, and then there was a click near her neck. The headless puppet caught his head in a hurry and began to press it on his neck frivolously. Duncan's atmosphere couldn't be created any longer. He could only sigh dumbfoundedly and waited for Alice to put his head back. Then he continued, "However, I suddenly felt that it would not be a bad thing to have one more crew member on this ship. If you can be honest on this ship, I can arrange a place for you." "You said it earlier." My head was scared off. After all, Duncan couldn't hold back the corners of his eyes trembling. "So what's going on with your neck?" Alice looked innocent. "I don't know. I usually don't have so many opportunities to come out and do some activities. I don't know why my body has such problems." Duncan looked at Alice silently for a few seconds and said seriously, "It seems that lying in bed for a long time is not good for the cervical spine." Alice, looking at the speechless Miss Doll, Duncan suddenly felt a little better. "Well, all in all, there is a new crew member on the Lost Home. Come with me, and I will arrange a place for you to rest." Chapter 14. The harmless new crew. The Lost Home was big, remarkably big for a sail-powered ship. Its size seemed to Duncan almost more than necessary. Such a large scale means larger warehouses, more artillery, stronger structures, and a more stable posture in the face of wind and waves, all of which mean that it is sufficient to face the most difficult long-distance voyage challenges. But at present Duncan has no plans for the so-called long voyage. This surprisingly large ghost ship brings him only a sense of loneliness, so if there is an extra crew who can talk on the ship, it is by no means a bad thing. Anyway, there are some unused guest rooms on this big ship. The sound of footsteps broke the silence in the corridor. Duncan took the Gothic doll down the wooden stairs and came to the cabin on the lower deck of the aft deck. This place is located directly below the captain's cabin. Judging from the structure, it should be considered a big ship. Compared with the dark, gloomy and eerie areas on the lower floors, the high-end residential area here is more or less bright and tidy. Duncan stopped in front of a crew cabin and then casually pushed open the half-hidden wooden door. Inside was a poorly furnished single room. There are several single cabins like this on the ship, but they have been unused for a long time, and there is no sign of anyone ever using them. After initially exploring the upper floors of the Lost Home, Duncan noticed the existence of these empty rooms. But he didn't think much about it at the time. But now he has personally taken charge of the ghost ship, knowing the secret that the ship can sail alone, a doubt arises spontaneously. Since this ship doesn't need a crew at all, who are these crew cabins on the ship for? The single rooms in the upper cabin are obviously reserved for upper-level seafarers such as the chief mate, second mate, and bosun, and there are bunk cabins for general crew in the lower area. In addition, there is also a dining room for multiple people on the ship. Unlike the chess and card room, different from those sails and cables that do not need to be controlled manually, the existence of these facilities is prepared for people. But the ship doesn't need a crew at all. Duncan frowned slightly. He had already realized that this ghost ship that was sailing alone at sea now should have had a crew at some point in its history. At least from the beginning of the ship's construction, it was designed with reasonable crew facilities for the use of seafarers. So what happened to make the ship what it is today? Where did the original crew members on this ship go? Is the real Captain Duncan the owner of this ship from beginning to end? What does that weird goat head know? Captain? A suspicious voice suddenly came from behind. Duncan's thinking was interrupted instantly, and he was shocked at the same time. Then he realized that it was the voice made by the puppet lady. He even forgot the existence of Alice for a moment. In the past few days, Duncan had gotten used to the fact that he was the only living person on this ship, and he was used to the noisy goat's head voice. But suddenly there was Alice, and he was not used to it. "My name is Duncan. You can call me Captain Duncan, of course. It is your freedom to call me Captain directly." Duncan quickly straightened his expression, and then turned to look at the lady doll following behind him. "This after the empty room is yours. Go in and have a look." "Ah, yes." Alice nodded, first glanced over Duncan's shoulder to see the situation in the room, then turned around and grabbed the wooden box that was always floating behind her, and he carried it on his shoulder and walked into the room carefully. Seeing Alice's coffin that was always inseparable, Duncan couldn't help the urge to tremble at the corners of his mouth. He watched the lady doll carefully place the coffin next to the bed, and then inspected the inside of the coffin very carefully. It was covered with velvet lining, and then I began to look around the furnishings in the room, and finally couldn't help but say, "You have to carry this box with you all the time, don't you?" "Yeah," said Alice logically. "Where else should I put it? This box used to be your seal. I thought you would care about it." Duncan frowned. "It seems that you can't do without it. It's those people who sealed me, and it's not the fault of the box." Alice sat on the box and patted the lid of the wooden box while talking. "Would you like to come in and sit down together?" Duncan shook his head. "No. How do you feel about this room?" "Ah, very good." Alice looked very happy. She looked around the simple furnishings in the room, but it seemed that she was in a gorgeous palace. Is that a wardrobe? I don't have any replacement clothes, should I use it? But it would be nice to have a cabinet. Oh, and a table to put things on in the future, but I don't seem to have anything to put on it either. Maybe use it for my hair? It would be handy for combing my hair just as long as you're satisfied. Watching a gothic doll sitting on a coffin and planning his life is a very strange sight, especially there are some suspicious contents in the plan. But Duncan's face slowly reveals a trace of smiling. He took half a step back, his expression returning to normal. You can rest here for a while to get used to the environment here. Except for the stairs leading to the lower floor, you can move freely on this floor and the deck floor. The structure here is not complicated, and you should be able to grasp the location of all the rooms quickly. I'm in the captain's cabin. You can find me over there if you have anything to do if I'm not there. There is a talking goat's head on the nautical table. He is my first mate. Alice was still listening and nodding, but her eyes widened when she heard the last two sentences. Goat's head? That dark wood carving? Looks like you've noticed it. I noticed it, but you said it can talk. And it's your first mate? Alice looked surprised. I thought it was just it's incredible. You are a doll that can talk and walk. Duncan looked at Alice blankly. Do you still think a talking goat's head is inconceivable? Alice froze for a moment, looked down at her hands, and muttered as if she had just realized it. It seems to be the same. Duncan shook his head, turned and left. That's it. You can rest here, and find me if you need anything. Alice's voice came from behind him. Yes, Captain. After leaving, Duncan didn't go anywhere else, but went straight back to his captain's cabin. He sat down at the large nautical table, and the carved wooden goat's head on the table immediately moved, creaking and shaking his head. Turning to Duncan, the captain is back. It looks like you've settled the lady you see, as I say, a mild and harmless lady who will do no harm to your voyage. I can also chat with you to amuse yourself. I see that you have decided to keep her on board. Do you plan to arrange something for her to do? The Lost Land does not need people very much. The deck will clean the deck, the guns will scrub the guns, and the water tanks will maintaining the water tank. Maybe she can manage the galley? You seem to have been dissatisfied with the food on board. Speaking of food, it seems that we need to replenish some ingredients first. The bacon and hard cheese in the warehouse may be a bit stale, and though a rough sailor cannot fault the food at sea, the great Captain Duncan felt that his brain was about to boil, and he was convinced of one thing again at this moment. With this noisy goat head, he really needs a normal conversation partner like Alice. Shut up, he gave the goat head a hard look, and continued after the latter shut up. You were very honest when Alice was around just now. I thought you had finally learned to keep quiet. The captain can't interrupt when interviewing new crew members. This is the rule at sea, even if I am your loyal first mate, second mate, bosun. And Duncan didn't wait for the goat's head to finish speaking. In fact, if he didn't interrupt, the goat's head wouldn't be able to finish at all. Pay attention to the movement of that puppet these days. Are you going to stare at that lady? Are you worried about her? Oh yes, the necessary caution is the captain. She has a lot of secrets, and she didn't tell them all. Maybe it's because she really doesn't know it, or maybe she's deliberately concealing it for some purpose. Anyway, she's a cursed doll after all, and it has the title of Anomaly 099, Duncan said lightly. The people on that ship used a lot of seals to prevent Alice from leaving the wooden box, but now the sealed doll is swaggering on my ship. I need to spend a little time to confirm that Alice is really a harmless puppet, even if it's just harmless on the Lost Homelander. Mum. Chapter 15. Touching the flame. After taking the helm himself, Duncan has real control over the Lost Homeland, and can perceive any movement on the ship, but even so, out of caution, he still orders the goat's head to keep an eye on the cursed doll movement. Because he knew that he was not an expert in the field of mysticism, and he knew little about the extraordinary power of this world, and a doll that could walk and talk was beyond his knowledge, and Alice's words and deeds might be harmless, yes, but if that puppet lady has any influence that is invisible to the naked eye, he probably won't be able to see it. In this regard, Goathead is more professional than him, and even putting this aside, Duncan also knows that he can't pay attention to the situation of the Lost Homeland all the time. Although he has now decided to survive in the world here, he may still ask for help when the situation is necessary. Returning to the world opposite the door, by then he might not be able to perceive the movements on the Lost Homelander. Thinking of the last point, Duncan's eyes suddenly changed slightly. He calmly glanced at the goat's head on the edge of the nautical table, and the latter's obsidian-carved eyeball stared blankly back. When I returned to my bachelor apartment, did this goat head notice anything? What was it like on the lost home when he left it? This sudden question made Duncan feel a little irritated, but under the hollow gaze of the goat's head, He didn't show anything, but paid a little attention to Alice's situation. Of course, he has no hobby of peeping even if the other party is an inhuman existence, so he can only roughly perceive the situation below the deck, but even if it is only through the perception transmission with the lost homeland, he can at least it is possible to determine Alice's current location and determine if she has attempted to destroy something. After all, under the harmless, elegant, and beautiful appearance of the lady puppet, there is the essence of the cursed puppet, a dangerous individual called Abnormal 099 by ordinary people in this world. She is currently still in the room, and she may really be studying the furnishings in the room and arranging a resting place. Duncan breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, the goat's head next to him suddenly made a voice, "Captain, what are your plans next? If you feel bored, you're loyal, shut up." Duncan glanced at the goat's head, and then pressed his hands on the edge of the nautical table. With the change in his thoughts, the feeling of holding the steering wheel with both hands came to his mind again, and the green flames flowed like water again. In the burning flames, Duncan's body turned into a spirit body again, and the overflowing fire spread along the nautical table, all the way to the captain's room, spread to the upper deck, climbed up the mast, climbed up the cables, and made the translucent sail of the spiritual body fluttered with the wind. With a large number of mainsails, side sails, and horn sails flexibly adjusting their angles in the sea wind, the huge three-masted sailboat began to slowly accelerate on the vast sea, and Duncan's eyes fell on the nautical chart in front of him. As expected as in the picture, he saw that the gray-white fog entrenched on the nautical chart also changed instantly. The silhouette representing the lost country was slowly moving forward, and the fog around the silhouette dissipated. After thinking for a while, he began to try to focus on the chart. The dark green flames shrouded the nautical table, conveying the captain's will like an extension of Duncan's limbs. In this subtle connection state in the next step, Duncan finally vaguely realized the mystery of this sea chart, which obviously also belonged to extraordinary items. With a thought, the silhouette representing the lost home on the chart instantly enlarged a little, and then shrank back to its original size. Duncan was zooming the picture presented by the sea chart, and this whimsical move was successful, although no matter how zoomed in, all that can be seen at the edge of the sea chart is a haze. But Duncan has determined at this moment that this sea chart, the map, is enough to record and present every inch of the ocean explored by the lost home, and present the details around the lost home accurately, and in real time. Under the hollow gaze of the goat's head, Duncan's face did not change any expression, as if a real captain was seriously observing the chart with a stern expression, but a faint excitement emerged in his heart. His gaze scanned the flames rising from his body, and his consciousness sensed the state of the lost homelander and the changes in the chart. This weird green flame is indeed the key to controlling the lost homelander, and it is also the key to controlling many strange items on this ship. Maybe this is the power of the captain? Duncan pondered the power of the flame, and he knew very well that if he wanted to truly control the ship and survive in this weird world on this basis, he had to figure out his abilities. First is the complete mastery of the flame. As for the next arrangement that Goat Head said just now, Duncan looked at the sea chart that was slowly changing in front of him, and the white mist slowly dissipating around the silhouette of the lost homelander, and the plan in his heart was also very simple. Since I don't know enough about this world, and since the map is full of fog, it must be right to open the map first. After all, sailing is for going out on waves. Anyway, the image of Captain Duncan in the minds of the locals in this world is a world boss wandering around in wild areas. Even if he and the lost country stay honestly at sea, the reputation will not improve in any way. As for whether it would be risky to have a random meeting on the sea so aimlessly, Duncan thought so before he personally steered the helm. The ship was also wandering around, and the lost country had never anchored. How come additional risk? Compared with the previous situation of blindly drifting, sailing in the sail situation can at least dispel the fog on the chart, which can be regarded as the end of the previous state of complete passiveness and fog. Duncan stood up from behind the nautical table, and the green flames on his body gradually dissipated. But in his perception, the translucent spirit sail on the mast of the lost country did not disappear, part of which was entangled on the mast and cables. The green flame is still burning, continuing to carry out the will of the captain. Combined with what he observed when he was steering before, Duncan had a vague understanding in his heart. Although the ship raised its spiritual sails in the flames after he steered, neither the huge sails nor the many things that operated automatically on the ship depended on the captain himself. The power of this ghost ship has its own power source. Although he still doesn't know what the energy that moves the ship is, it is clear that all he needs to do as the captain is to give orders to the ship. Then, naturally, the ship will faithfully carry out the command of the captain. Duncan left the nautical table and turned to look at the small door in the deepest part of the captain's cabin. Behind that door was his private quarters as captain, which he had used as a resting place during the first few days of exploring the ship. Now, he needs a quieter environment to study what he can do as the captain of the lost home. But until then, the ship, already under sail, has to be watched over. He looked at the wooden goat's head on the edge of the nautical table, and said in a very natural tone, "You take the helm." "Ah?" Goat's head froze for a moment, and his tone was a bit surprised. "But Captain, I have something to do, don't disturb me during this time." Duncan didn't seem to care what the goat head had to say at all, he just ordered very naturally. In the information spreading from the deck, he could clearly see various connections hidden in the depths of the ship. Masts, cables, sails, rudders, guns. Everything is connected invisibly. Some kind of vein like nerves or blood vessels runs through the ship, and all these connections eventually converge in the captain's cabin. The goat's head is vaguely connected to all of this. Perhaps this mysterious and eerie goat's head is the lost country itself? Or some kind of control agency to take over the ship in an emergency? Duncan was not the builder of the ship, so naturally he didn't know how the ship worked, but he thought that if he was the real Captain Duncan, he must know what the goat's head could do. On the other hand, the goat head, who always calls himself first mate, should take it for granted that he can take the helm instead of the captain if the situation requires it. Duncan needs to take a little risk and make some arrangements that he has never done before, but as a real captain, he must know and must make arrangements. After all, captains always have time to rest. A second later, the goat hair made a cheerful and noisy voice. "Ah, good captain, don't worry, your loyal." Duncan ignored it, just waved his hand casually, turned around and walked into the bedroom located deep in the captain's cabin, and closed the door casually. Chapter 16. Walking in the spirit world. The door closed behind him, blocking the empty gaze of the goat's head. But Duncan can still clearly perceive the lost home, and perceive every subtle change on the ghost ship in that sympathetic feeling like a limb extension. He sees a series of sails on the lost home. The angle was finely adjusted in the sea breeze, and the black steering wheel on the stern bridge was turning slightly, which further stabilized the lost home in the waves. As he expected, Goat's head temporarily took over the rudder and began to perform his duties as first mate conscientiously, but Duncan could still take over the ship himself at any time. Compared with when he was directly at the helm, the lost country was weakened in terms of flexibility and speed, but now Duncan's main purpose is to further dispel the fog on the chart, and there is no clear goal en route. He didn't care about this effect. After confirming that the goat's head hadn't moved, and that the gothic doll below the deck was staying in the room obediently, Duncan breathed a sigh of relief and took a look at the not-so-big room. This is his private bedroom as the captain, and it is also the most comfortable and elegant room on the lost country. In addition to a soft bed, there is a large classical wardrobe and a display on the wall facing the door of the room. There are many shelves with strange items, and there is a dark brown desk opposite the bed, but there are no books on the desk, only a few furnishings and tools for writing and drawing. There is a window next to the desk, which can directly look out to the distant sea, and there are several hooks on the wall beside the window. The pirate sword and the flintlock that Duncan is carrying now were hung on these hooks before. Duncan came to the desk, put the long sword and the flintlock gun where they were convenient, opened the desk drawer, and checked the gunpowder and lead bullets in the wooden box. A small brass compass was placed next to the buckshot and gunpowder bag. Duncan picked up the compass and saw that the pointer under the glass shell was still spinning wildly, as if being pulled by an invisible chaotic force field. The bottom of the compass was engraved with a small line of text, "We are all homeless." Duncan casually put the compass in his hand and played with it, watching the pointer on it turn around as if he was drunk. He has checked the things here many times. He discovered this room during the initial exploration, and the things here, including the line of messages, must have been left by the real Captain Duncan. After reviewing the information he had so far in his mind, Duncan exhaled, casually placed the compass on the table, raised his right hand and rubbed his fingertips gently. A cluster of small green flames were then ignited at his fingertips. Under the reflection of the flames, half of Duncan's palm immediately showed a transparent and illusory texture like a spirit body, but under conscious control, the flames, but it didn't spread around like before, but hovered over his fingers like a candle. After the flame stabilized, Duncan approached the flame with his other hand to feel it, then took a quill from the side, and touched the flame with the end of the pen. Neither could feel the heat, nor was the quill ignited, only a little dark green spread on the pen barrel, making the quill glow faintly. Duncan did not feel any feedback from the quill, which was completely different from when he touched the chart and the rudder with the flame. Duncan silently recorded the new experience in his heart. This spiritual body fire has no temperature, and it will not ignite things, and it is very likely that it will only be connected with the abnormal things on the lost country, and it will not affect ordinary things. Then there will be no feedback, so if it's something anomalous from outside the lost home, will the flame respond? Duncan was contemplating, and for a moment, a figure of a gothic puppet suddenly appeared in his mind. Alice, as if it was an abnormality from outside the lost home. Will she be affected by this spirit body fire? But that's all he thought about for a while, and then he threw this far-fetched idea aside. Because even if Alice is not human, even if she is the cursed anomaly 099, she is also an independent individual who can speak and walk, has her own thoughts, and is now a crew of the lost Homelander. Duncan has subconsciously think of it as a person. He couldn't accept using a living person to test his flame after all. He wasn't sure how far-reaching the flame would be to the affected abnormality and whether it was harmful. Then Duncan tested a few more times, while checking the nature of the flames, and at the same time determining whether there were extraordinary attributes behind the various things in this bedroom. Finally, his eyes fell on the little brass compass with message on it. The brass compass was lying quietly on the table, and the pointer under the glass shell was spinning randomly, but I don't know if it was an illusion. When Duncan kept the flames on while his malicious eyes fell on the pointer seemed to suddenly it froze for a moment, then continued to wander around in place as if nothing happened. Duncan, this thing definitely reacted to his gaze just now. Originally, he was a little apprehensive about this compass. After all, there was a handwriting left by the real Captain Duncan on it. He was very worried whether the dead ghost captain left some kind of power or something on this personal item, trapped to keep out thieves, so he hadn't tested the compass with flames, but after seeing the compass's reaction, he suddenly made up his mind. Duncan reached out to pick up the compass, and the cold touch spread to his fingertips. After glancing at the pointer that was still spinning wildly, he directly put the thing into the right hand used to maintain the fire of the spirit body, and slowly clenched it. The green flames flowed instantly like burning grease, spreading between his fingers, and a faint flame quickly ignited on the surface of the compass. In the flames, there seemed to be countless phantoms rising and falling, and the next moment, the pointer that was spinning randomly it stopped suddenly and pointed straight to a certain direction on the vast sea. Duncan's heart moved. At this moment, he clearly felt the feedback from the compass and confirmed that it was indeed an abnormal item that could be controlled by the fire of the spirit body. The details in this feedback, a sudden gravity came over. Duncan only felt his body shake for a moment, and in the next second, his eyes blurred. The furnishings in the captain's bedroom had turned into nothingness at some point, and even the surrounding walls and roof disintegrated and dissipated like snowflakes in the blink of an eye. In the light and shadow, the boundless darkness filled his vision. Duncan stood in the center of the darkness in astonishment, and the alarm bells were ringing in his heart. His first reaction was to reach for the musket and saber beside him, but in the next second he found that there was only the brass gun left beside him. The compass it was still held tightly in his hand. Duncan blinked, and in his gaze countless wisps of slender light suddenly diffused around the brass compass. These rays of light spread and interweave in the darkness, expanding infinitely like weaving a net, and between the interweaving of rays of light, there are countless bits and pieces of light emerging. Some of these rays of light are scattered, some converge like rivers. In the background of the intertwined light network, it is as brilliant as a galaxy. Duncan looked at the vision in front of him in some confusion. He was vigilant and a little uneasy, but for some reason, he didn't feel any sense of crisis even. Between this dim light net and Star Point, he felt a sense of peace and comfort that he had not seen for a long time. The next second, a strange feeling came suddenly. Duncan's eyes were involuntarily attracted by a cluster of starlight intertwined in the optical network. Dark. He subconsciously stretched out his hand towards the starlight. A huge pulling force came at this moment. Duncan felt as if his soul was flying, and he involuntarily rushed towards the star that was about to fall into darkness, while the dense web of light woven by the compass was in sight. Jean quickly retreated, and the surrounding galaxy formed by starlight suddenly began to rotate and creep. During the rapid fly-over, he subconsciously looked at his right hand holding the compass tightly, but saw that the compass had disappeared at some point. From the corner of the eye, I saw a shadow suddenly condensed in the darkness. The shadow appeared naturally as if it was always by his side, and quickly fell towards the dim light spot along with him. Duncan could only vaguely see that the shadow seemed to be a flying bird, and before he could see the details clearly, his eyes went dark. The heavy touch from the real world came from the limbs, together with the stench of rotting limbs, and the harsh sound of heavy chains mopping the floor. Mum! Chapter 17. The cave cold, damp, the stench of rotting flesh, the noise of chains rubbing against the ground. Many strange perceptions flooded into Duncan's mind, but he was unable to successfully open his eyes for a while. At this moment, he felt as if his soul was divided into two parts. One part remained on the lost homeland, and the other part was stuffed into a completely unfamiliar body, which was as difficult to control as an old and broken machine. The chaotic perceptions were rampant in his nervous system, mixed with a certain dullness and numbness. He tried to open his eyes and move his fingers, but he could not feel the existence of these corresponding body parts at all. This uncomfortable feeling lasted for several seconds, and the unspeakable numbness and sluggishness in the nervous system finally faded away. Duncan felt that his body seemed to have awakened from a long hibernation and gradually regained the ability to move. He finally opened his eyes and saw clearly what was happening around him. What came into view was a dim, dungeon-like space with burning torches stuck in the stone wall in the distance. The flickering flames reflected the horrible scene around. Duncan saw many people, or rather many dead bodies, thrown in a mess among the wet and waterlogged soil and rocks. Most of them were in tattered clothes, but a few still had intact clothes on their bodies. Condensed water droplets dripped from the top of the cave, and in the distance one could vaguely hear the sound of sewage flowing in an underground river or sewer. The sound of the friction of the iron chain seemed to come from deep in a corridor connected to the cave, and was gradually fading away. Duncan blinked, trying to figure out what was happening. He looked down at his right hand, and what he saw was a completely unfamiliar and thin palm, and tattered clothes on the arm, and the brass compass that he had been holding in his hand had long disappeared. He looked up at his side again. He remembered that when he was traveling in the starlight and light network, he had caught a glimpse of a shadow following him. The outline of the shadow looks like some kind of bird, but of course, he found nothing. The bird-like shadow did not seem to come into the real space with him. Duncan slowly clenched his palms, forcibly suppressed the nervousness in his heart, and then tried to rub his fingers. A very faint green flame emerged from the fingertips. It has to be said that this cluster of flames now looks much weaker than what Duncan was familiar with, but he still felt a little relieved. As the flames burned, his still somewhat confused mind was slightly refreshed, and he felt more clearly than before some kind of spiritual tearing and connection. He clearly sensed that another part of his spirit was not here. He sensed the existence of the lost hometown and himself sitting at the desk, holding a brass compass in his hand. This feeling was very strange, but Duncan immediately realized what was happening. Something happened to his spirit, some kind of projection, or extension. That projected part of his mind crossed an unknown distance, and now entered another strange body. And in this state of projection, he can still clearly feel the existence of his real body. This must be related to the brass compass. Could this be the ability of the anomalous object? Duncan had some guesses in his mind, but he didn't let his random thoughts occupy too much of his time. After confirming that his body was still safe and sound, and his mind was still under control, and that he had only temporarily entered a distant and nameless body, he had calmed down a little and was ready to confirm what his new body was like. The first thing that can be confirmed is that the surrounding environment is definitely not on a ship. This is land, the land that he has been drifting on the sea for so many days and couldn't find. Secondly, this gloomy cave did not look like a good place, and the corpses scattered around did not look like a normal burial scene. This body that he was occupying now, what kind of bad luck had trapped him in such a hell on earth? Duncan took a deep breath and pushed himself up to sit up. His body had been leaning on a large rock, and that posture was not comfortable. It was this inhalation and standing up that made Duncan suddenly feel a huge strangeness in his body. He felt that the air he had breathed into his body was released all at once, and a certain empty and weird feeling came from his chest, and even the movement of getting up was deformed. Duncan looked down in surprise and saw a big hole. There was a big hole at the heart, and the things inside had naturally disappeared. A cool wind blew through it, mixed with the breath that Duncan had just inhaled and had not yet completely dissipated, and finally dissipated in the humid air. Duncan even saw the scene behind him clearly from a certain angle. What the hell? No matter how thick-skinned he was, and even though he had gained some worldly experience on the lost homeland, Duncan still felt a layer of cold sweat at that moment. He felt goosebumps appearing all over his body, and every hair on his body stood up. After this sudden shock, he immediately realized that he was still standing here and even had the energy to curse. With his heart missing and a huge hole in his chest, he didn't even feel any pain in his body. Is this a corpse? After a moment, Duncan came to his senses, further understood his situation, and quickly calmed down. Occupying the body of a corpse and getting up and moving around might not be something to be surprised about. After all, he also has a ghost ship that can sail on its own and a wooden goat first mate who can make people's brains boil. He also recently met a cursed puppet that can act separately and is good at riding the waves on the vast ocean. Which of these things is not more terrifying than the dead talking? At least he only lost his heart now. Alice's head is often not on her neck. With all these chaotic thoughts running through his mind, Duncan regained his composure at a speed that surprised himself. He then confirmed the movements of his current body, and slightly adapted to the abnormal movements caused by the abnormality in his chest. Then he walked towards the corpses thrown in the cave. Really, Duncan looked at the first body, and was not surprised to see the horrifying hole in the other's chest. He was a middle-aged man with a haggard face and ragged clothes, looking like a beggar on the street. He had been dead for a long time, but his angry eyes still conveyed his struggle and despair at the moment of his death. Duncan continued to walk forward and saw one corpse after another who had lost their hearts. They fell miserably on the cold stones. There were only two exceptions. Those two people had hideous wounds on their heads, which seemed to be the result of hitting the stones violently and dying on the spot. Duncan couldn't help but have some associations. Perhaps these were two people who committed suicide before facing the pain of having their hearts torn out. To be honest, the things in this cave were a bit too exciting for ordinary people. Even Duncan felt a little overwhelmed after checking all the corpses. After checking the conditions of all the corpses, he had to find a relatively clean stone in a far place and sit down. He sorted himself out bit by bit and guessed the truth of it all while calming down. Obviously, this was a horrific murder, but judging from the overly cruel and uniform killing method, it seemed that this was not just murder, but also revealed some kind of evil ritual. Duncan summoned the spiritual flame again, feeling the connection between himself and his real body. He knew that he could cut off this projection state at any time and return to the safety of the lost homeland. But he felt he needed to figure out what was going on here, even if it's just to get some information about the land. Duncan exhaled, feeling the air leaking from his chest, and stood up from the big rock where he was resting temporarily. He looked towards the corridor deep in the cave and remembered that the sound of the friction of the iron chain came from there. There are not only corpses in this underground space, but also other people moving around. Those who can move freely in this terrible place should be able to give him some answers. It was certainly not safe to rush over to check the situation, but Duncan didn't care. Anyway, I feel at ease now. Chapter 18 Sewer. Before leaving the cave where he was temporarily hiding, Duncan first grabbed some rags from a nearby corpse and wrapped them around himself. This was not because he could not stand the coldness in the cave, but to more or less block his open heart. Although the hole in his chest did not affect Duncan's survival at all. For a normal person at heart, walking around in the freezing cold was really too weird. Putting something on his body could at least bring some psychological comfort, and also reduce the weird feeling brought by the draft. Duncan also considered the possibility of bumping into other people while walking in this underground space. According to common sense, having a big hole in the chest might not be conducive to talking to strangers. Just like that, after simply treating his wound, Duncan carefully left the gloomy and damp cave. He entered a corridor connected to the cave and slowly walked towards the depths. This temporarily occupied body was not convenient. Not only did the fatal damage on the chest affect the flexibility of movement, but Duncan could also clearly feel the weakness of this body. The overly thin hands and feet could not even walk fast. It was completely incomparable with the ghost captain's body, which was so strong that it was obviously beyond that of a mortal. Duncan couldn't see the full appearance of his current body, but judging from the part he could see, he guessed that this should be a teenager who was weak due to long-term severe malnutrition. Although the one controlling this body at the moment was the soul of a powerful ghost captain, it seemed that the power of the soul could not break through the physical limits brought by this weak body. Unfortunately, there is no choice now. Duncan can only control this barely usable body to slowly explore forward in the deep corridor. He knows that with the state of this temporary body, he will be helpless in any crisis. He can only pray that this body can be used for a while longer. The corridor is deep, damp and dark, but there seems to be hidden ventilation holes. A slight airflow is always flowing nearby. At regular intervals, torches or oil lamps can be seen hanging on the wall. The existence of these things proves that there are always people active here. After walking along the corridor for a long distance, Duncan suddenly found that the road ahead was open and traces of man-made things began to appear in his sight. He saw a fork in the road at the end of the corridor. The road connected to the fork had flat walls and high semicircular arches. The brick ground was dark and damp, and there were two waterways flowing along both sides of the ground, with disgusting sewage flowing in them. On the walls on both sides of the road, you can also see openings that look like drain pipes. Sewage flows out of some of the outlets and is injected into the waterway below, flowing towards the darker distance. Sewer? Duncan quickly realized that what he saw in front of him was obviously some kind of large-scale sewer system, and the place where many bodies were hidden before seemed to be a natural cave structure that was connected to the sewer. There are huge sewers, natural caves connected to the sewers, and hidden bodies. Countless guesses popped up in Duncan's mind in an instant, and while many speculations popped up in his mind, he was also carefully observing the details of the sewer in front of him. It is huge in scale and well-built. The main supporting parts seem to be made of reinforced concrete structure. If necessary, it may even be enough to be used as some kind of underground shelter. To be able to build something of this size, the city above the sewer must be quite large, and all the technologies must have been developed to a certain level. Technology cannot exist in isolation. Behind every engineering product there must be the simultaneous support of countless related industries and technologies. Even if it is just a sewer, it can reveal to Duncan the construction, planning, materials, maintenance level behind it, as well as the corresponding life concepts of the residents. This is enough for Duncan, who is currently severely lacking in intelligence, to obtain some valuable information from the civilized world. Duncan walked forward along the sewer and suddenly stopped after walking a short distance. His eyes fell on the nearby wall. There was a lamp embedded in the wall, a lamp with a glass shell and a metal cage that looked quite sturdy. Compared to the torches and oil lamps in the cave before, the lamp embedded in the wall was obviously brighter. Inside the frosted glass shell was a bright flame burning steadily, and the light it emitted was enough to illuminate a considerable distance in the sewer. Duncan moved closer to observe carefully. To him now, everything that came from outside the lost homeland, especially the creations of modern civilization, was extremely attractive. After observing for a long time, Duncan finally figured out what the light source in front of him was. It was a gas lamp. But this gas lamp seemed different from the ones he had seen in the information before. In addition to the difference in style, the most obvious thing was that he saw several thin symbols on the glass cover of the lamp. The symbols seemed to have been added when the lamp shell was first produced. The curved shapes looked like hieroglyphs. Duncan did not recognize these symbols, but he immediately thought of the mysterious runes he had seen on the mechanical ship and on Alice's coffin. Although the contents are different, they all have a similar temperament. It was something sanctified and ritualistic. Duncan stepped back a little and looked up deeper into the sewer, where he saw gas lamps burning brightly at intervals on the wall. As an underground facility that is rarely visited except for necessary maintenance, the lighting equipment in this sewer seems a bit excessive, and there may be similar mysterious runes on the outer shell of each gas lamp. This gave Duncan a feeling that these densely distributed gas lamps were actually fighting against something in this dark underground where no one visited. The human civilization world represented by them was fighting against something. Duncan walked forward along the path illuminated by the gas lamp, keeping his eyes focused on any valuable clues on the surrounding walls, ground and vault. Suddenly, he noticed something strange out of the corner of his eye. He stopped between two gas lamps, which was a darker part of the sewer. He looked up and saw something painted with dark red paint high on the wall, near the vault of the sewer. Duncan squinted his eyes and tried to make out what was going on for a long time before he finally saw the picture clearly drawn by the rough lines. He saw a pair of hands reaching towards the sky, as if worshipping something, and in the direction where those hands were, there was a sphere emitting brilliant light hanging high in the sky. Under this scene of worship and crowding, there is a line of crooked words. The strokes of the words are trembling, as if containing strong enthusiasm and expectation. The letters above are not any kind of language on earth, but Duncan naturally understands the false sun will eventually fall, and the real sun god will be resurrected from blood and fire. All life belongs to the sun, and all order belongs to the sun. Duncan stood quietly in the sewer, looking up at the boundary area where the gas lamp light was the dimmest, looking at the dark red graffiti, and looking at the sun that seemed to be soaked in blood, shining brightly and worshipped fanatically. It was as if I was looking at another world for a long time. He watched like this for a long time until a noise suddenly came from deep in the sewer and the sound of several footsteps reached Duncan's ears. He suddenly looked up in the direction where the sound came from, only to see several figures in robes walking towards him from the front. The heads and faces of those figures were shrouded in the shadows of their hoods, and they appeared in the depths of this filthy sewer like eerie ghosts. Duncan did not hide. In fact, there was almost no place to hide in this straight sewer, and his temporary body with limited mobility could not perform advanced operations such as blind spot movement, so after briefly thinking about it, he simply stood in the middle of the sewer, looking very calmly at the hooded men who were walking towards him and looked very suspicious no matter how they looked. Since this body cannot be escaped and is destined to be a disposable consumable, it might as well be exchanged for some information in the end. The next second, the hooded men who came out from the depths of the sewer noticed Duncan's presence. Oh my god! Chapter 19 Underground Assembly Hall. Those figures in burqas and hoods naturally noticed Duncan standing in the middle of the road without dodging or avoiding. At this moment, Duncan was still the same as when he just left the cave. His thin and dry body was covered with ragged clothes, and the rags temporarily put on his upper body blocked the big hole in his chest. He just stood carelessly in the middle of the road, but it looked like they were frightened by the hooded man who suddenly appeared, and those figures in burqas were obviously surprised. They were obviously stunned for a while, and then the leader, suddenly, a cry came out. One of the sacrifices has escaped. Immediately afterwards, Duncan saw them running towards this side, and another person shouted while running, "Quick! Stop him! Don't let him run!" Duncan shrugged, and just continued to look at these figures running towards him with no expression on his face. No matter how he looked, he didn't look like a good person. As he rushed over, he yelled, "Don't let him escape. A sacrifice has escaped." As a result, Duncan's behavior of standing obediently in the middle of the road without dodging or evading made the atmosphere awkward. The people who ran and shouted towards this side obviously felt that something was wrong halfway through, and the shouts in their mouths were involuntary. Stopped suddenly, but had to continue running this way. Duncan could almost smell embarrassment mixed with irritation from under their dark hoods, and then these awkward and angry people surrounded him front and back up. Only then did Duncan look around at the figures around him, and after hesitating for a moment, he said, "Should I run away just now?" After all, the atmosphere is here. Those figures in burqas didn't seem to hear Duncan's cold joke. They just glanced at him vigilantly and cautiously, and then looked in the direction behind Duncan. Two of them quickly lowered their heads to talk. After a few sentences, Duncan vaguely heard what they were talking about. Why did one come out? Could it be that the church's hyenas discovered this hiding place, but he doesn't look like he was let out anyway? Take it back first. This sacrifice that ran out is not quite right. It must be disposed of quickly. Let the messenger make the decision. Duncan didn't know the details of this group of people at all, let alone what the messenger mentioned by the other party meant. But thinking of what he saw along the way and the word sacrifice mentioned by the other party, he has already vaguely guessed some of the truth here. He didn't know how he should react to be considered a normal sacrifice, and he had no intention of cooperating with these people to perform at all. Outside the lost homeland, he used a temporary body. There were obviously few things to worry about, so after observing the surrounding situation for a while, he simply asked, "Where are you taking me?" Those wearing burqas were obviously a little surprised when they heard the sacrifice speak calmly in front of them. Even though their hoods still wore black veils that completely concealed their faces, Duncan could guess their surprise at the moment. One of the men in black glared viciously at the sacrifice in front of him through his mask, and said in a low voice, "You are not qualified to ask questions, take them away." Several men in black robes stepped forward immediately, but before they could do anything, Duncan took the initiative to take a step forward. "You don't need to do anything. I will just go with you." Several men in black robes looked at each other, probably feeling that the spirit of the sacrifice in front of them was a bit abnormal, but the leader of the man in black robe waved his hand. "This is the best. You won't be able to escape anyway. Come with us. You may still be able to meet the glory with dignity." Several men in black robes surrounded Duncan like this, sealed off all his escape routes from front to back, left and right, and led him deeper into the sewer. The stench and filthy smell in the sewer was disgusting, but these men in black robes walked on the dirty and moldy road calmly as if they didn't notice at all. Duncan remained expressionless as he followed these men in black robes forward. He listened attentively to the conversations of these people. These men in black robes didn't talk much among themselves, but in the occasional few conversations, Duncan still heard words such as prand, consul, and church. Useful words. "Is this the city-state of Perland?" Duncan said suddenly, as calmly as if he was chatting with an acquaintance. "Nonsense," one of the men in black replied subconsciously, but then he reacted and gave Duncan a ghostly look. "You are very calm, boy. Do you know what will happen next?" "I can probably guess it." Duncan nodded, even with a smile on his face, and then he asked tentatively, "The real sun god, isn't it?" The steps of the men in black obviously stopped for a moment. They seemed to have misunderstood Duncan's strange reaction. One of them whispered to his companion, "Wait, is this also a believer of the Lord?" "Impossible, he is obviously an escaped sacrifice," another man in black robe said in a low voice, and then he glanced at Duncan. "You are quite clever, but don't think that you can avoid the sacrifice. The Lord has ordained your destiny, and you better accept it." Duncan was non-committal. He knew that his overly calm reaction caused the group of suspected heretics to have a wrong imagination. Most of them thought that they were pretending to be calm and pretending to be believers to try to survive, but the real only Duncan himself knows the situation. The temporarily occupied body is struggling to move normally, and the muscles on his face are as stiff as the extremities of necrosis. Of course, there is only a calm, expressionless face left. But he didn't care what these cultists were thinking. He just wanted to collect as much information as possible in this one-time exploration operation. So he asked casually, "What do you think the current situation in the sky is? Is the sun a false sun? Do you think it will fall sooner or later?" Of course the false sun will fall. This is obviously a topic that can stimulate these cultists, and Duncan heard a positive and fanatical reaction from one of them as he wished. Even the lackeys of the Holy See must be admitted in the general history. The sun in the sky is a twisted and grotesque thing that only appeared after the great annihilation. It is the sun god who really brought life and order to all things in the world, but my lord was usurped by that despicable fate. Sooner or later, the despicable fake there is a time when it will collapse from the sky. Immediately afterwards, Duncan heard the surrounding cultists responding, sooner or later, the false sun will fall. The real sun god will recover soon. The excess sea water in the world will be driven back to nothingness by the great power of the sun god. In the deep space, the earth will return to a fertile and stable era. Listening to the words of these cultists who have obviously begun to speak up, Duncan's thoughts are spinning rapidly in his mind. He knows that this kind of fanatical cultists cannot be understood by common sense, and most of what they believe in is distorted and tampered with. Later information, but some of the information they revealed is still worthy of reference. The sun hanging in the sky is a fake. The true sun has been usurped of power. They firmly believe that the true sun is a fallen god and that god will rise from blood and fire. They also mentioned the excess sea water in the world and the era of abundance and stability. What do these words mean? Duncan had a lot of thoughts in his mind, but those few cultists calmed down after a while. They still remembered the business and that they were escorting an escape sacrifice, so the few people closest to Duncan returned to silence. The two at the end of the line muttered a few words. Do you think this sacrifice is a bit evil? He doesn't seem quite right. I'm a little unsteady. Could it be that the sacrifice stayed in the dark underground for too long when he escaped before and his spirit was given by something that's just right? The power of the Lord will purify him. Duncan listened to the conversation behind him, and he especially noticed the words lightless underground. But just when he wanted to gather more information from the conversation, the leader in black robe stopped. Haste, here we are, the cultist in black robe said in a low and cold voice. Duncan felt a little regretful in his heart, but immediately after, he was attracted by the scene in front of him. Ahead is the end of a road, where several sewers meet, and in this wide space that looks like a small underground hall, there is a meeting place of black-robed cultists. Chapter 20 Sacrifice. The scale of this sewer system is extremely large. In Duncan's eyes, it has even completely exceeded the necessity of its single function of urban sewage disposal. The gas lamps with runes that can be seen everywhere in the sewers and the reinforced structures that can serve as shelters make him have many guesses about the location of this underground facility. But no matter what ideas the builders had when this place was first designed, one fact is obvious. Deep in this huge facility, beyond the sight of the world above ground, this dark and cold place has become a nursery for the growth of some evil force. A cult that nominally worships the sun but only makes people feel cold. At the intersection of several sewer corridors was a wide underground space. Solid cement pillars supported the brick and stone dome. Metal cast pipe structures were connected crisscrossing near the dome, like a spider web. Bright gas lamps illuminated the entire space, as well as the crowd gathered at this intersection. At a glance, there were at least hundreds of people in black robes gathered in this dirty and damp place. In the middle of them was a high platform protruding from the ground, and on the platform stood a tall figure also in a black robe. He was obviously the person with the highest status among this group of people in black robes. The man standing on the platform did not wear a hood like the others, but a golden mask. The mask had a strange style, like a disc radiating endless flames in all directions, and its surface was also engraved with a large number of fragmented cracks. Behind the masked man, there is a strange totem on the platform. It is a tall wooden stake with a blazing fireball fixed on the top of the stake. The core of the fireball seems to be some kind of metal with many small holes on its surface, and flames are gushing out from those small holes. This was the scene Duncan saw when he was escorted here. The black-robed people gathered in the assembly hall also noticed him. We caught a fleeing sacrifice on the way to the gathering place. One of the black-robed men who had been in charge of the escort stepped forward and said respectfully to the leader on the platform, with a tone that seemed to be seeking credit. This sacrifice has been in the dark for too long, and his mind is a little confused. May you use your power to bring the glory of our Lord to this pitiful body. The cult leader wearing a golden mask on the high platform turned around and stared at Duncan, who had an expressionless face. There was a hint of surprise and coldness in his tone. The escaped sacrifice? Duncan did not react at all. He just observed the place curiously, including the golden mask on the cult leader's face and the burning fireball totem behind him. Perhaps, these symbols are strange and bizarre to ordinary people in this world, but he could see at a glance that these things were imitating the sun. It did not imitate the ball of light in the sky today that was bound by a large amount of flames and 2 rune rings, but it imitated the burning sun that Duncan was familiar with, emitting brilliant light. These people were really worshipping the sun, a sun that seemed to have fallen in ancient times, and they were worshipping it as some kind of god. Duncan raised his head and looked calmly at the black-robed priest who was overlooking him from the high platform. However, perhaps due to the necrosis of his facial muscles, his calm look seemed more like some kind of numbness that indicated a loss of intelligence in the other party's eyes. The priest wearing the golden mask stared at Duncan for less than 2 seconds, then turned around and instructed a person standing next to the platform, "Go check the place where the sacrifices are kept. Check it out and come back quickly." After giving the order, he nodded to the black-robed men who escorted the sacrifices back and said with a hint of praise, "You have done a good job. Even if it is a small contribution to the Lord, it will turn into your eternal glory after the sun shines on all things again." It was just a routine compliment, but the black-robed men seemed to be greatly encouraged. They became excited and praised the real sun god while pushing Duncan to the front of the platform. The masked priest did not speak to Duncan until this moment. "Poor man who has gone astray. Can you feel the deep cold between the lightless rocks and soil?" Duncan had no idea what the charlatan was saying and could only wait in silence. The priest obviously didn't care about the reaction of the sacrifice in front of him. His words were not spoken to Duncan, but more to the believers around him and to the sun god he firmly believed in. Cold and darkness are the sufferings left by the false sun to this world. Under the rule of the false sun, the deep dark ocean ravages the world, and only fragmented small pieces of land allow living beings to survive. But even on these fragmented lands, people can hardly escape suffering. The shadows of the past linger underground, and their claws and teeth that devour people are wriggling in the lightless caves. The earth is filled with hatred and disputes, and the pure souls of mankind are tainted by the breath of the evil god. How can we endure this long suffering? How can we endure the distorted and absurd world brought about by the false sun? We cannot stand this. We only hope that our Lord will return. We only hope that the true sun god will descend upon the earth again, burning in blood and fire, and bring order and prosperity back to the world. Under the incitement of the masked priest's highly inspiring tone, Duncan could clearly feel that the atmosphere in the gathering place had changed. The believers in black robes became excited one after another. They first echoed, and then the echo turned into fervent shouts. "May the real sun god come to the earth again, burning in blood and fire. May the real sun god come to the earth again, burning in blood and fire. May the true sun god descend upon the earth again," the priest on the high platform said loudly, and then pointed at Duncan. "And today, my Lord will further awaken from his slumber. The blood of the lost will heal the wounds left by the sun's collapse. Bring up the sacrifice." Several men in black robes rushed over from the side, but Duncan was faster than them. He didn't even need anyone to push him. He turned over and climbed onto the altar by himself. Although this body is not very useful, it is still possible to climb a platform. After climbing up, he came to the front of the masked priest, who still maintained the majestic and mysterious posture when he gave the order just now. The change happened very suddenly, and the way it unfolded was completely beyond past experience, so that the cult leader could not react at once. He and Duncan looked at each other through the golden mask, and the area around the altar suddenly became strangely quiet. Duncan seemed to have not noticed the change in the atmosphere around him at all. He just felt that he had collected more information about this world and was looking forward to seeing more rare scenes before this temporary body was scrapped. Well, Duncan rubbed his hands with a sense of exploratory anticipation and inquired seriously, "Then what? What's the next step?" "Masked priest, didn't you hear clearly?" Duncan frowned, but because the muscles on his face were not working well, he didn't frown. "I say, what should I do next?" At this time, the priest finally reacted. Although he was wearing a mask, there was a moment of confusion in his eyes. But soon he spoke in a low voice, "The shadow and the darkness has indeed affected your mind. But don't worry, the most holy sun will end your suffering. Bring the sacrifice to the totem." Two men in black robes immediately walked onto the stage from the side, pulled Duncan's arm, and walked towards the totem pole with the fireball on top. Duncan didn't quite understand this step, so naturally he couldn't cooperate in advance, but he still remained non-resistant and obediently stood under the burning fireball under the clamp of the two men in black robes. Although Duncan did not show any physical resistance, the two men in black robes who grabbed his arms still used great strength to clamp the arms of the sacrifice, as if they were afraid that the sacrifice would resist violently and break free at the last moment. Their strength was so great that Duncan could even feel the bones of this temporary body bursting bit by bit, which made him look at the two men in black robes in surprise. And then, the masked priest came over again. Duncan's attention was immediately drawn to that place. He saw the priest pull out a peculiarly shaped dagger from his arms. The dagger was oddly bent like dry and twisted knuckles, and the blade was pitch black as if made of obsidian. The surface of the dagger reflected the firelight on the totem, and it looked very strange. Duncan silently prepared to cut off the soul projection. He knew that this was the limit of the information that this temporary body could collect. The cult priest's prayer sounded from the high platform. "Oh, the most holy sun god, please accept this sacrifice on the altar. I offer you the heart of this sacrifice, and I hope you will return it from blood and fire. Duncan immediately stopped the action of cutting off the soul projection and looked at the cult priest in front of him as if he was a fool. Oh my god. Chapter 21 Good news. The ceremony went well. After hearing what the cult priest prayed for, Duncan immediately stopped cutting off the soul projection and returned to the lost home. He looked at the masked priest who had just finished his frantic prayers like a fool, watched the knife in the opponent's hand that seemed to be carved from obsidian being raised high, and he watched the believers around the altar. They got excited and chanted the name of their Lord in unison, chanting the true sun god who had fallen for many years and was torn apart in legend. They want to offer their own sacrifice to the sun god. The specific method is to offer the heart of the sacrifice. Now Duncan finally understands where the tragedy in the cave came from, and what is going on with the crazy and criminal acts of these cultists. Then, he saw the masked priest take a step towards him, and a layer of dark flame suddenly appeared on the surface of the obsidian knife held high in the opponent's hand. This eye-catching supernatural phenomenon instantly made Duncan curious. He guessed whether the knife was also some kind of abnormal item, and whether the priest in front of him was some kind of special human being who could control extraordinary power. How many such special human beings are there in the civilized society of this world, and what social roles they may play? At the same time, he watched blankly as the black flame-burning knife stabbed straight into his chest, making a hollow sound as it pierced several layers of rags. The flame burned inside a few times, but nothing was burned. On the totem pole behind him, a series of unsettling crackling bursts suddenly came out of the blazing fireball. It seemed that some kind of tearing and dizzy noise was mixed with the crackling sound, and Duncan faintly it felt as if something had diffused from the fireball. It was a cold and crazy touch. It was difficult for him to describe this feeling, not only because the senses of this temporarily occupied body were dull, but also because it felt beyond. He didn't know any of his previous perceptual experience. He only knew one thing: in this world where supernatural phenomena really existed, there was no doubt that the priest's sacrificial ceremony in front of him was in big trouble. The change in the symbol sun on the totem pole immediately attracted the attention of the closest believers. Accompanied by a few suppressed exclamations, the scene quickly quieted down from the frenzy. The two men in black robes also seemed to be intimidated by something, let go of their hands in horror, and bowed down to the totem pole in fear, while the priest holding the obsidian knife froze in place, and he still maintained the posture of holding the blade, but fixedly stared at the face of the sacrifice in front of him. Through the opening in the mask, Duncan could see a pair of eyes that were falling into confusion and chaos. Duncan twitched the corners of his stiff mouth and finally squeezed out a weird smile. He slowly raised his right hand and put it on the hand of the priest holding the obsidian knife tightly. The green flames flowed and penetrated like water, slowly wrapped around the knife. Almost instantly, Duncan felt the feedback from the knife, but strangely, the feedback felt weak and hollow, as if the knife was just some kind of fake imitation, and only the hollow shell was lodged. A little borrowed strength in general. But to him, it didn't matter whether the knife was a fake or not. He smiled at the priest with the corner of his mouth pulled, and said unhurriedly, "I have to say two things." In the next moment, the priest felt that the connection between himself and the obsidian knife was suddenly disturbed by some external force, and his sincere and fanatical belief in the sun god was directly cut off as if he had hit an indestructible barrier. Number 1, I'm a big-hearted person, you see, it's so big. Duncan tore off the already tattered cloth, which was cut open by the knife at this moment, and a shocking hole was exposed. Through that terrifying hole, the priest who presided over the sacrificial ceremony could even clearly see the scene behind Duncan. Second, try to avoid serving expired food to your lord. Duncan gently pushed the priest's hand away. For some reason, after he wrapped the obsidian knife with the green spiritual fire, the priest in front of him seemed to lose most of his strength at once, so that Duncan, who was weak now, physical strength, could easily push this tall priest away. And after being pushed away, the priest seemed to react suddenly, and great panic and anger enveloped him. His muscles trembled, and he pointed at Duncan, as if he wanted to restore order in the sacrificial field with a loud shout. The filth that came back from the dead. This is a reanimated soul. You have desecrated this sacred sacrificial ceremony. The filth? Which daring necromancer is behind you? Aren't you afraid of the power from the sun? I don't understand what you're talking about. Duncan glanced at the obsidian knife he was holding in his hand, and said casually while feeling the weak power feedback in the knife. Then he looked up at the priest in front of him, and listened to the words behind him. With the crackling noise from the totem pole, a bold whimsy suddenly appeared, but I suddenly want to satisfy my curiosity. After speaking, he suddenly raised the obsidian knife in his hand, and under the eyes of a group of black-robed believers who were still in a state of chaos and panic, he pointed at the masked priest and said loudly, "O Supreme and Holy Sun God, please accept this sacrifice on this high platform. I offer the heart of this sacrifice to you, and may you return it in blood and fire." In the next second, he saw the flames on the obsidian knife rise suddenly, and the icy touch from the totem pole behind him was suddenly restrained, and pointed to the masked priest not far away. Duncan saw the priest suddenly showing a terrified look in his eyes. He seemed to want to leave the high platform immediately, but the speed of the knife was faster than him. The knife flew out of Duncan's hand directly. It was pulled by some invisible force wrapped in blazing black flames and faintly entangled green fire, and pierced straight into the priest's chest. While screaming, the cult leader's chest was pierced directly, and his heart was turned into ashes in an instant. In the next second, the knife returned to Duncan's hand, and even after this back-and-forth effort, the bit of power contained in it seemed to have finally been completely exhausted. It is known that there are two people within the sacrificial range of the cult's altar. One of them has a heart and the other has no heart, and a certain evil god wants to taste his heart today, and ask who will lose his heart? Of course it has to be the one with the heart. But even if this logic is true, the smoothness of the whole thing still exceeded Duncan's expectations. He didn't expect that his try with a big brain hole would actually work. He didn't turn his head until he watched the cult priest fall down. Glancing at the totem behind him who had regained his composure, he murmured in a strange tone, "As long as the word is right for the co-author, anyone can give it to me?" Of course, the fireball on the totem pole will not answer his question, but the cultists around the altar have obviously reacted at this time. A huge panic is inevitable. But amidst the panic, even more fanatical believers burst into anger. This anger even surpassed the fear they felt when the totem appeared before. The few cultists who were closest to the altar reacted first. They shouted the name of the sun god and rushed towards Duncan. These most courageous believers soon led more people, and a large group of people in black robes disappeared. Mentality rushed forward, and some even took out the daggers they carried with them from under the black robes. Duncan originally planned to yell, "I dedicate the hearts of all the people on the altar to the sun god," to try the appetite of this weird, evil god, but when he saw that some of the cultists who rushed up were still falling from their arms, after taking out the revolver, he immediately dismissed the idea. Considering the time for the sacrificial ceremony to take effect and the law of accurate and fast within 7 steps, he simply pointed his middle finger at the group of heretics and cut off the gun. The projected state of the soul. Let these crazy people go crazy, he's going back to the lost. At the same time, in the boundless sea, a burst of rhythmic footsteps sounded on the deck of the lost home. Dull Alice in a gorgeous gothic dress left her room and came to the door of the captain's cabin. The gorgeous wooden box did not follow behind Miss Dull this time, but was left in the room by her. The captain said that she can move freely in the cabin below the deck, and she can also walk around on the deck. If there is something she doesn't understand, she can come directly to the captain's cabin to find him. Alice remembered it well. It's time to push the book. The first push of this book is the Salted Fish Prince of the Ming Dynasty from the Taoist at the foot of the mountain, and the introduction is directly posted. Zhu Yijing, the grandson of Emperor Zheng of the Ming Dynasty, and the biological son of Empress Kangning, looked at his proud eldest brother, his second brother who knew how to make choices, and his biological mother who was expressionless and unable to see through. "Well, it seems that there is nothing wrong with me?" Ever since, the young men felt at ease and put on the hat of shame as a traveler, and started a life of salted fish waiting to die. Until the arrival of a bowl of chicken soup. Aha! Here comes the chicken soup. Chapter 22 Crew Rules. Alice stopped at the door of the captain's cabin. Miss Dull raised her head, looked at the dark oak door in front of her, and noticed a line of words written in beautiful cursive letters on the door frame. The door of the homeless. It's not surprising that such a line of writing appeared on the door frame of the captain's cabin of the lost home, but Alice still frowned subconsciously. What she was curious about was not the door, but why she knew writing. She has no memory of learning words. In fact, she doesn't have any learning memory, and she doesn't remember where she has accumulated experience of going out and talking with people. But this knowledge exists naturally in her mind. She can understand the letters on the door frame of the captain's cabin, and she can also understand the purpose of the various furnishings in the room, and it is impossible to learn these things just by lying in the wooden box and listening to the people talking outside. Then where does this knowledge come from? Before today, Alice had never considered this question, but for some reason, after talking with that Captain Duncan, the concept of curiosity suddenly popped up in the puppet's mind that should have been running peacefully forever. She recalled it carefully, and the change seemed to come about after Duncan asked about the origin of the name Alice. At that moment, she questioned some things that she took for granted in her mind, and began to try to recall her name afterwards. Something in my mind loosened. Alice didn't know whether this looseness was good or bad, but she didn't like this feeling of confusion, so she quickly shook her head. put aside the doubts in her heart, and adjusted her mentality at the door of the captain's cabin. Only then did he put his hand on the handle of the oak door and push it forward slightly. The door didn't budge. Alice was stunned for a moment, and then tried to push, but felt that the wooden door seemed to be made of steel as a whole without any movement. Then, just as she was about to try again, a voice suddenly came from the captain's cabin. The voice was hoarse and low, as if it came from a piece of rotten wood. "Open the door, ma'am." It wasn't Captain Duncan's voice. Alice was taken aback, but she reacted quickly and pulled the door out with a hurried "oh." This time, the door opened very lightly. It was only at this time that she recalled that when the captain brought her here, it seemed that the captain had indeed opened the door. It seems that the knowledge of life that appeared out of nowhere in my mind is just knowledge after all, and I still lack real survival experience after sleeping in a wooden box all year round. Alice thought about it for a while, then carefully poked her head and looked into the captain's room. There was no one in the captain's cabin. The eye-catching nautical table was quietly under the light, the surface of the chart on the table was covered with thin mist, and the dark wooden goat's head was turning its eyes from the edge of the table. A pair of obsidian sculpted eyes stared blankly at him. "Please come in, ma'am. The captain is busy. You can wait for him here for a while," the goat head said, more polite than Alice imagined. "Also, try to avoid such poking around, it will make people lose their minds. Some of the overly sensitive guys on the town hall feel that they are being hated by people, and it will be troublesome to appease them, and if your head falls again, it will be a problem, and I don't have hands, so I can't help you pick it up. Really speak. This wood sculpture really does the talking." Although Captain Duncan said before that the goat's head on the nautical table can talk, Alice was taken aback when she suddenly heard a wooden carving talking to her. "So many things," and she responded consciously, "Ah, yes, but my head doesn't fall off that easily, and the last time I installed it, I specially wait. You said that some sensitive nerves on the lost country. Does this ship still have?" Alice belatedly realized the information revealed in the words of the goat's head just now, and she immediately looked around with surprise and nervousness. At this moment, she seemed to feel that the captain's cabin, and even everything on the lost country, they all shook in the dark and turned into a strange thing like that weird goat's head, and the voice of the goat's head came to her ears immediately. "Is this strange? How can such a huge ship? It takes a lot of manpower to run the ship. Don't you think the great Captain Duncan will wash the deck himself?" What the goat's head said actually made a lot of sense. Although Alice's newly awakened mind felt that something was wrong with it, she could only nod after thinking about it for a long time. "It's true. So there are many like you on the Lost. The captain has only one loyal lieutenant, and the rest are a group of guys with not very bright minds. You don't need to think about communicating with them. They have no interest in communicating with others." The goat head interrupted before Alice finished speaking. She said, "But considering that you are a newcomer on the ship, it is normal that there are many reasons and rules that you do not understand. As Captain Duncan's most loyal first mate, second mate, and I need to tell you something that is necessary to survive on this ship. Common sense that must be known. After all, the captain will not condescend to explain this kind of thing to newcomers. Ma'am, are you ready?" Alice listened in a daze. She had forgotten her original purpose of coming to the captain's cabin. She just felt that every time the goat's head opened her mouth, it was a series of crackling. After 3 or 2 openings, the rhythm of the conversation was completely not on her side anymore, especially when the other party suddenly popped out a series of titles. Just now, she felt her whole head was buzzing, and when the other party's voice fell, she could only nod subconsciously. Okay. Very good, then here are some rules that the crew of the Lost Home must know, which will help newcomers adapt to the environment faster, and fully accept the blessings from the Lost Home and the great Captain Duncan on the dangerous boundless sea." The goat's head was obviously satisfied with Alice's answer. He shook his wooden head while talking, with obvious complacency in his tone. "First, Captain Duncan is the absolute ruler of the Lost Home. Captain Duncan is always right, even if there is a conflict between reality and Captain Duncan's language. Captain Duncan's judgment must prevail. Secondly, any crew member can only move in the areas allowed by Captain Duncan. In the areas that Captain Duncan has not ordered to open, they are absolutely not allowed to step in half a step, because those areas do not exist. Third, if you step into an unauthorized area, and you are lucky enough to survive temporarily, you must stay where you are and wait for Captain Duncan to bring you back, or wait for death in peace. It is absolutely not allowed to return without permission, because you return not homeless. Fourth, the Lost Home is always sailing on the correct channel. Don't question the captain's sailing plan. If you find that the scenery around the Lost Home is different from what you expected, or you find that the Lost Home has fallen into a deeper area, then this is part of the normal sailing plan. Fifth, the captain will occasionally leave the ship, but he will definitely return. During the captain's absence, the Lost Country will continue to sail normally, but all crew members will not be near the bridge at the stern. The rudder system will be lacking when the captain is away. A sense of security, the stern cable will hang any daredevil who shows usurper behavior. 6th, on the Lost Home, there are only 6 basic rules for crew members. 7th, the door of the captain's cabin opens outward. Goathead seems to have popularized common sense to new crew members more than once. He said these rules very smoothly and naturally, but Alice immediately noticed something was wrong when she heard the last 2. Wait, Goathead sir, you just said in Article 6 6th on the Lost Home, there are only 6 basic rules for crew members. Goathead replied immediately, and he did not hesitate when mentioning these basic rules. For a moment, Alice doubted whether something was wrong with herself or the first mate in front of her. But you mentioned the 7th item just now. 7th, the door of the captain's cabin opens outward. Goat's head replied very naturally. Alice stared blankly at the black goat's head wood carving on the table. After doubting her ears, she began to doubt her brain, but soon she realized that she didn't have a brain, so she confirmed again. These are the 2. Not contradictory? There is no contradiction. Listening to Goat's head's firm answer and looking at the other's empty and dark eyes, Alice opened her mouth, but suddenly swallowed all the questions back. Mom. Chapter 23. Bird. Alice doesn't really understand the world, but at least she had heard countless whispered conversations in the wooden box filled with fear and tension, from the mouths of the crew members and guards who were extremely nervous, because they were responsible for escorting abnormal objects. She established the most basic understanding of certain unusual things. If something is obviously unreasonable, but actually exists, then first follow the existing safety rules, and then consider research and analysis while maintaining a safe distance. This is the way to survive. Alice actually had no real sense of the fact that she was anomalies to 99. She didn't know what she could do or what she had done to make humans so afraid and wary of her. She didn't know how an intelligent anomaly should think in order to be normal at this moment. She was just thinking like a human. Since Goathead said there are only 6 crew rules, then there are 6. Since Goathead mentioned the 7th rule, then remember the 7th. But she still had some questions that she couldn't help asking. Just now I tried to push the door of the captain's room, and it did open outwards. Why should such a self-evident thing be emphasized in the rules? The wooden Goathead stared into Alice's eyes quietly. After 2 full seconds, he spoke more concisely than ever before. Sometimes, it can open inwards. That if you see a door opening inwards, never go in. On the entire Lost Homeland, only the captain is authorized to do so. This was the first time since a while ago that Goathead spoke in such a serious and even intimidating tone. He was not so serious even when he was introducing the crew rules just now. Alice was startled by the other party's particularly serious tone. But then, the goat-headed man's tone became cheerful again, and he spoke happily as if the serious topic just now had never happened. Okay, the necessary introduction process for new crew members has ended. Now let's talk about something else. Oh, by the way, ma'am, what are you doing in the captain's room? If you don't know how to use the facilities on the ship, then there is no need to trouble the great Captain Duncan. If you want to find someone to chat with, then you have come to the right person. I am very good at finding topics and know countless great deeds about this ship. You are not interested in great deeds? Then I can introduce you to the most famous dishes on the vast sea. I know a thing or two about cooking. As soon as the goat had opened his mouth, he got into the mood. Alice tried to interrupt him several times, but never got the chance. By the time she realized that something was wrong, it was too late. Anomaly 099, the puppet Miss Alice, faced the second greatest terror on the Lost Homeland today, besides Captain Duncan. At the same time, in the dormitory separated from them by only a wall, Duncan was quietly listening to the noise coming from the chart room. He had just woken up, and his soul returned to the Lost Homeland from a distant body. He did not hear the initial conversation between Goathead and Alice, but he heard the crew rules and the conversation about the captain's room door opens outwards. Important intelligence, unexpected gains. Before Duncan had time to digest the information he had just collected from the cultists, he accidentally overheard the conversation between Goathead and Alice. No matter whether it was those weird and strange crew rules or the information revealed in Goathead's words at the end, they were extremely important to him. Sure enough, when he pushed open the door of the captain's room and returned to the opposite side, Goathead knew that for him, this action meant returning to his bachelor apartment, but for the lost hometown, it seemed to mean the captain has left temporarily. Goathead had no doubts about this and regarded it as something Captain Duncan would normally do. So, the real Captain Duncan of this ship once opened the door of the captain's room and went to a mysterious world? And this happened more than once, so much so that it not only became a matter of course in the eyes of the Goathead, but also became part of the crew rules of the Lost Homeland? This news was good for Duncan, as it meant that he wouldn't have to worry too much when he returned to the other side later. Even if there were new crew members on the ship, he could use this method to disappear from everyone's sight without worrying about someone following him and discovering his secret. But on the other hand, Duncan had inevitable thoughts in his mind. This was related to the 6+1 crew rules that Goat had deliberately mentioned. What do these crew rules mean? What are the basis for these codes that sound bizarre, dangerous, and even contradictory? Some of its items sound like they are intended to emphasize the authority of the captain, but the real situation is obviously more than that. Those strict behavioral restrictions are more like allowing people on the ship to survive in a dangerous environment and allowing the crew to avoid invisible dangers through certain established rules. Duncan frowned slightly, thinking about his true position in these rules. Judging from the content of the rules, he, the captain, seemed to be the only individual with the greatest freedom and initiative. He did not need to worry about the invisible risks on the ship, and he himself was even the arbiter of many risk ranges, but the premise of all this was that he must be the real Captain Duncan. This is the most worrying part. But he suddenly remembered his exploration activities on the lost homeland during this period of time, and the fact that he was walking around the cabin freely. Goathead had never reminded himself about the crew rules. He regarded himself as the real Captain Duncan. He had never encountered any strange dangers when he was on the ship, and it was impossible for a second captain to jump out and impose any restrictions on his activities. From this point of view, the dangers mentioned by Goathead in the crew's code seemed to be nothing to worry about. Duncan exhaled lightly and continued to listen attentively to the noise coming from the chart room. After half a minute, he hated himself for not being able to turn off his ears. The trash-talking doll and the noisy Goathead started a conversation. The latter was obviously having an overwhelming advantage. The crackling nonsense was surging in the chart room like waves on the vast ocean. Even Duncan, who was hiding in the dormitory and observing secretly, couldn't stand it. He felt that he had to go out quickly to rescue the poor doll lady. Alice, who lacked social experience, was obviously no match for the goat-headed man, but after a little hesitation, Duncan stopped. He had just finished a wonderful soul journey and there was still a lot of information to be sorted out and more experience to be summarized. He had to figure out what had just happened to him and whether this process was controllable. As far as he was concerned, this ability to project his spirit to distant places would be the most useful means for him to collect land intelligence in the future. Under normal circumstances, he would have to worry about whether staying in the room for too long studying his new abilities would attract unnecessary attention from Goathead, but now that there was Alice outside who could distract that noisy guy's attention, it couldn't be better. Duncan silently said sorry to the doll lady in his heart, then looked down at his right hand. The next second, his expression froze. The brass compass, which was slightly larger than a pocket watch, disappeared at some point, and he clearly remembered that until not long ago, the compass was still tightly held in his hand. Duncan's eyes suddenly became stern, because he found that he had not noticed the changes in his hands at all. And this kind of laxity and negligence appeared for the first time since he came to this strange and weird ghost ship. The next second, he clenched his right hand, and a ball of dark green flame quietly appeared between his fingers. Then he stood up, from behind the desk, ready to use the connection between the spiritual flame and supernatural things to check whether there were any abnormal signs in the entire dormitory. But just as he stood up, Duncan's movements suddenly stopped. A subtle connection emerged from the bottom of his heart. He subconsciously looked in the direction where the connection came from. In the corner of his eye, he saw a few feathers that seemed real and illusory falling from the air. Duncan looked in surprise at where the feather fell, and saw a phantom quickly emerging and condensing in front of him. In just 2 or 3 seconds, the phantom condensed into a snow-white pigeon. The missing compass was hanging on the pigeon's chest, and a familiar obsidian knife was lying quietly at the pigeon's feet. Chapter 24 Pigeon? After several seconds of reaction, Duncan finally twitched his lips and muttered subconsciously. Why is it a pigeon? Why did a pigeon suddenly appear? Why is my brass compass still hanging on this pigeon? How did the knife get here? Or to sum up all these words in one sentence, can anything normal happen on this abnormal ship? Exclamation. While Duncan was full of questions and muttering to himself, the pigeon that had been awake for a long time seemed to finally wake up. It nodded its head and took 2 steps on the table, then came in front of Duncan, stretched its neck hard, and made a loud cooing sound. Duncan looked at the bird in silence. Somehow, many classic images of pirate captains suddenly emerged in his mind. He then looked down at his captain's uniform. It seems that it is indeed standard for a captain to have a bird by his side, but normally it should be a parrot. What's with the pigeon? When the pigeon heard what Duncan said, it immediately nodded seriously and said in a strange and dull female voice, "Transmission completed." All the mutterings in Duncan's heart were cut off at once. He almost choked on his saliva and stared at the white dove in front of him with a look of astonishment. He recalled how he felt when he first stepped onto the ship and saw a talking goat head in the captain's room. But after all, this was not his first day on the lost homeland, and he was no longer surprised by the anomalies of this world. So the pigeon's words only surprised him for a moment. The next second, his expression became serious, and a green spiritual fire was faintly emitted from one of his hands. He stared at the pigeon in front of him with caution. "Where are you from?" The pigeon tilted its head, one eye staring straight at Duncan, the other eye looking at the ceiling. "The address is wrong. Please check the address again or contact the system administrator." Duncan, compared to the momentary dullness in his expression, there was a bigger wave in his heart at this moment. What the pigeon said didn't seem like the style of this world, nor were they words that could come out of Goathead, Alice, or any of those black-robed cultists. Instead, they were terms that he, as an earthling Zhu Ming, was more familiar with. However, the pigeon seemed to be completely unaware of the changes in Duncan's eyes and expression. It just lowered its head and pecked at its wings, shook the brass compass hanging on its chest, and then began to stroll leisurely on the table. After pacing for a few steps, it ran to the obsidian knife again, and used its claws to push it towards Duncan a few times, and uttered the same strange female voice as before. "Take this solar battle axe, and embrace the glory of battle." Duncan suddenly stood up from his desk, his chair making a harsh noise as it hit the floor. He stared at the pigeon in front of him, which still had an innocent and indifferent look on its face, while an extremely bizarre yet funny emotion filled his mind. There is no way this pigeon could have been originally on the lost homeland, and it is almost impossible that it could have originally existed in this world. Only Zhu Ming understood the meaning of the words it said. Perhaps because the noise of the tables and chairs colliding was so loud that even the chart room could hear the noise, Duncan suddenly heard the voice of the goat head in his mind. "Captain? Are you okay?" Duncan was still staring at the pigeon on the table. He knew that Goathead didn't dare to peek into the captain's bedroom, so he replied in a low voice with his usual calmness, "I'm fine. Miss Alice is here to see you. Would you like to receive first?" "Yes, Captain." Duncan exhaled and looked back at the door leading to the chart room. The Goathead's noisy bombardment of Alice continued. The puppet lady had tried to get up and leave several times, but was stopped again. Duncan felt that he should go out and rescue the unfortunate puppet, but now, he had something more important to confirm. "Please work harder, Alice." Duncan sat back at his desk, ready to try to communicate with the pigeon in front of him. At this moment, he suddenly saw something he had not noticed before. A fire line extended faintly from the cluster of spiritual fire that was jumping between the fingers of his right hand. The flame was as thin as a hair, and its end dissipated in the air after floating out for more than 10 centimeters. And on the body of that strange pigeon, there was also a wisp of faint green flame. The flame was hidden in the gap between the feathers under its wings. The other end also extended into the air and disappeared in midair. Duncan frowned, raised his right hand, and with a thought, the flame jumped and the pigeon on the table disappeared instantly. The next second, the pigeon appeared on his shoulder. It lowered its head and pecked Duncan's hair, making a loud sound. "Coo." Duncan snapped his fingers again, and the dove on his shoulder reappeared on the desk. A brass compass hung on the dove's chest, its shiny shell reflecting the green light of the flame. Duncan frowned. Related to this brass compass? He has been able to determine that there is a certain connection between this pigeon and himself, a connection that is even closer than the connection between him and the lost homeland. This may also explain why the pigeon knows some knowledge from Earth that only he knows. He just can't be sure why this pigeon appeared. After much thought, he could only focus his suspicion on the strange brass compass. From the time I tested the spirit fire until now, all the abnormalities started from this brass compass, whether it was the previous experience of soul traveling, or the experience of the spirit being projected onto a corpse, to the time when the compass disappeared and reappeared hanging on the pigeon's chest. The source of everything seems to be this thing. Duncan stared at the pigeon for a moment, then reached for the compass. He wanted to take it down and study it carefully. The pigeon did not dodge or block, but Duncan's fingers failed to touch the surface of the brass compass. His fingers went straight through and touched the soft fluff on the pigeon's chest. It's like passing through an illusion. The pigeon jumped twice on the spot, as if it was tickled by Duncan, and opened its mouth and yelled, "Today is KFC Crazy Thursday. Me 50." Duncan's eyes twitched twice, and he tested it twice more in disbelief, and finally confirmed that it was impossible for him to remove the brass compass from the pigeon. This thing had obviously undergone some kind of alienation and turned into an illusion bound to the pigeon, which could not be taken off or touched. Or the pigeon is the real body of the brass compass. Duncan suddenly had many guesses in his mind, and he didn't even know whether he should believe them or not. The only thing he could be sure of was that the appearance of this pigeon was closely related to his experience of soul travel using the brass compass, and this experience might also have changed the shape of the brass compass at the same time. This might be the nature of the brass compass itself, its inherent attribute as some kind of abnormal object, or the cost of use. As for why the pigeon was so abnormal, it was not because of the compass, but because of the earthling Juming. All of this cannot be confirmed or refuted now unless Duncan can find the instructions for the various anomalies on the lost homeland. As for now, he had to figure out what to do with this abnormal pigeon. After a brief thought, he decided to give the pigeon a name first. "I have to give you a name," he tapped the table with his fingers and said to the pigeon in front of him very seriously, "I think you should be able to understand what I say, right?" The pigeon tilted its head, and its two green bean-sized eyes looked at Duncan vaguely. "Ai? Oh my god." Chapter 25 Communication is difficult. The pigeon tilted its head, probably feeling that Duncan didn't hear clearly, and quickly repeated it, louder than before, "Ai." Duncan finally understood what the bird meant. "You mean, your name is I." Pigeon nodded proudly, paced back and forth on the desk. "Cuckoo." Duncan couldn't help rubbing between his eyebrows. He always felt that communicating with this bird was weirder than communicating with a goat's head, and this was mainly because of the pigeon's elusive language style. "Do you know how you were born? Or how did you appear here?" The pigeon thought for a while, and looked at two different directions at the same time. "Oh, the page is gone. Try refreshing it?" Duncan, he found that he couldn't understand what was going on in the bird's mind at all, and he wasn't even sure whether the sentences it suddenly jumped out were related to the current topic. But he was absolutely sure that the bird was thinking, and was communicating with himself very seriously. It's just that it obviously has its own understanding of communication. Duncan talked to the pigeon, who called himself AI, a few more times, and it turned out that their conversations always maintained a frequency of parallel lines. Basically, they talked about each other. If they were related, they couldn't see where the intersection was. It's irrelevant. This pigeon will answer every question, and occasionally there will be a sentence or two that seems to answer Duncan's question. At the end of the exchange, there was not much progress. Duncan could only frown and muttered, "What kind of evil thing is this?" He felt that it would take him a long time to establish a normal communication with the bird, and this process might even be more difficult than for him to get used to the chattering of the goat's head. The pigeon was squatting on the table opposite him, blinking its small eyes innocently and occasionally muttering about V@50. Duncan didn't pay attention to the bird's chanting, but curled his fingers and rubbed them lightly, watching the green flames jumping in the air at his fingertips. At least he could be sure of one thing: although the brass compass was already the same as the pigeon in front of him integrate into one, but in essence, it is still an abnormal item that can be controlled by itself. The ghostly green flames of the spiritual body rose, and green flames also rose from the gaps in the feathers of the pigeon AI almost at the same time. The brass compass hanging on its chest bounced off with a snap, and the transparent glass under the shell, the slightly illusory pointer, is gradually stabilizing according to Duncan's will, and the dial depicting many mysterious symbols is gradually filled with flames. AI didn't react the whole time, but just bathed in the fire of the spirit quite naturally, as if waiting for Duncan's order. Before the brass compass was fully ignited, Duncan took the initiative to disperse the flames. During the test, Duncan also silently summed up, "The compass can still be used, it's just that there is a weird medium, and it's not sure what effect this pigeon will have for the time being. Maybe it's some kind of help. It's not clear what the compass is, and it's best not to make a second shuttle until you're ready. You should always pay attention to the changes in the compass and the pigeons in the next test. There is a connection between the pigeon and me. When the fire of the spirit body is stimulated, this connection will become more obvious. It can even directly control where the pigeon appears to a certain extent, but the control can only go to this step. AI obviously has its own will and will act according to its own ideas, and the instructions given to it may not always be carried out, which is different from other items on the lost home. Can speak, has a certain ability to think, and can judge problems independently compared with ordinary abnormal objects. The nature of this pigeon seems to be closer to that of a goat's head. Duncan summed up some currently known information in his mind, and finally, his eyes finally fell on the obsidian knife. The blade is like a dry and twisted finger, and the blade is black and reflective. This is exactly what the black-robed priest who wore a golden sun mask and presided over the evil sacrifice ceremony in the sewer assembly hall once held. From the point of view of its use, it should be a ceremonial blade. Duncan arrived at the gathering place that was suspected to be located underground in the Pran City state by means of spiritual projection, and when he returned, he also returned spiritually. He thought that this process should be completely spiritual or soul level. But now this ritual knife is really put it in front of yourself. After a little thought, Duncan reached out and picked up the knife. The cold and hard touches really transmitted, "This is a real item." Duncan released some spirit fire again, causing the flames to wrap around the blade, and judging from the empty feedback, the extraordinary power once contained in this ritual knife has indeed dissipated. Just like his previous judgment at the sacrifice site, this thing is not a real abnormal object, but should be an extension product of some kind of extraordinary power, or a temporary item infused artificially. Although Duncan didn't know what kind of system the abnormal objects in this world had, he guessed that this knife shouldn't be considered a rare item. At least it looked like it was mass-produced. "Is this something you brought back?" He raised his head, looked at AI who was resting on the table, and raised the obsidian knife in his hand. "And it was specially for me?" The pigeon stared directly at Duncan with its small red eyes. Its whole body was motionless, and it did not respond to the question. "Duncan," he asked again, and the pigeon remained motionless, as if it had suddenly turned into a lifeless sculpture. The sudden abnormal change made Duncan frown slightly, but just when he was about to stimulate AI with the flames of his spiritual body to see if he could forcefully wake it up, the bird lived again, and it jumped on the spot. He clicked twice and yelled loudly, "Take this solar tomahawk, take this solar tomahawk, take this." Okay, I understand. You don't have to answer every question I asked just now." Duncan quickly waved his hand and organized his words while forcing the pigeon to be quiet. "Then you know how you put the pigeons together. Did you bring this knife? Or you can carry the real thing on the shuttle, is that right?" The pigeon pondered for a while, then lowered its head and pecked at Duncan's finger. "The whole game is fully discounted, and everything is free. Duncan, I just pretend to understand." He sighed, feeling that the limit of communication between himself and the bird had reached this point. Then he stood up from the desk and looked in the direction of the chart room. Goat's Head and Alice are still outside, and the cordial and friendly exchange continues. Miss Puppet has not made a sound for a long time, and Goat Head has just started to tell the 17th way of seaweed stew. Duncan felt the need to save his only, and turned out to be the most normal-looking crew member at the moment. On the other hand, he stayed in the dormitory for too long, and there were some unusual movements in the middle. He felt that it was necessary for him to go out and show his face, so that Goat Head could feel at ease. But before leaving, he hesitated to glance at AI who was running around on the table. "Do you want to take this pigeon out too? How do you explain it when you take it out?" Duncan hesitated for only 2 seconds, then decisively grabbed the pigeon and put it on his shoulder. He is going to be active on the lost homeland for a long time, and this pigeon will definitely follow him for a long time in the foreseeable future. It is not known what the living habits of this bird are, but as a pigeon with thinking and communication skills abnormal object, it is probably difficult to hide somewhere like a dead object. There is an extra passenger on board, which cannot be hidden. If it is hidden now, once it is exposed in the future, it will greatly damage the image of Captain Duncan. So we might as well take this pigeon out openly, saying that it is his new trophy. He doesn't need to explain anything to the goat head, and the captain doesn't need to explain to the first mate. The first officer will figure it out himself. As for the strange words that the pigeon pops out from time to time, these must be incomprehensible strange words to the locals of this world, then there is no need to explain. Let the goat's head and Alice figure out a way to make up their own brains. With the fat pigeon on his shoulders, Duncan got up and adjusted his appearance and walked calmly towards the chart room. The pigeon proudly puffed out its chest, as if declaring, "Authentic good herbal tea, authentic good voice, welcome to Watch By."
Thanks for joining Fanfiction Reader. If you enjoyed it, hit subscribe and come back for more fan-made adventures.